Hello everyone, I'm Mr. Edison, and I'm here to guide you into a peaceful slumber. If you find this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to know where you're from and what time it is as you unwind. So settle in, get cozy, and let the relaxation begin. Labor Day weekend 2015. My family and I were searching for an escape from the noise and pressure of city life. My wife Heather had found an old fire watchman's cabin tucked deep in the Idaho wilderness, promising the isolation we craved. The advertisement boasted pristine forest views, a nearby river, and absolute seclusion, a perfect retreat for our family of 5 plus my mother. The drive took nearly 4 hours from Boise, with the final 2 hours spent navigating increasingly narrow dirt roads. Our GPS signal faded about an hour in, forcing us to rely on printed directions from the rental agency. Our 2 vehicles kicked up dust clouds as we climbed higher into the mountains. In the rearview mirror, I watched my mother's car following close behind, not wanting to lose sight of us in this unfamiliar territory. "Are we lost, Daddy?" asked Tom, my 5-year-old son, from the back seat. He sat between his siblings, Abby, 7, and Ben, 3, all of them growing restless after hours confined in their car seats. "Not lost," I answered, studying a crudely drawn map. "Just taking the scenic route." Heather gave me a skeptical look. "The scenic route involves knowing where we're going, Michael." I forced a reassuring smile. "Trust me, we're close." As we rounded another bend in the endless dirt road, the trees thinned just enough to reveal our destination. The cabin stood alone on a small plateau, surrounded by dense forest on 3 sides, with a steep drop toward the river on the 4th. It was larger than I'd expected, a main structure with a wide porch and 3 smaller outbuildings scattered nearby. Built entirely of darkened logs, it looked like it had been there for decades, perhaps a century, weathering countless mountain winters. I pulled up near the front porch, and my mother parked beside us. The children burst from the vehicle, delighted to stretch their legs after the long journey. Heather stepped out more cautiously, surveying our temporary home with a mixture of appreciation and unease. "It's rustic," she commented, eyes scanning the rough-hewn logs and metal roof. My mother joined us, breathing deeply of the pine-scented air. "It's beautiful out here," Judy remarked. At 62, she remained surprisingly spry, already reaching for bags in the trunk. "So peaceful." The cabin key had been left in a small lockbox attached to the porch railing. Inside, we found a spacious main room with a stone fireplace, a basic kitchen area, and 2 bedrooms, one larger one presumably for Heather and me, and a smaller one with bunk beds for the children. My mother would take the pull-out sofa in the main room. The furniture was sturdy but worn, the floorboards creaked with every step, and the windows were smaller than modern standards, giving the entire space a somewhat claustrophobic feeling despite its size. While Heather organized our food supplies and my mother helped the children settle in, I explored the outbuildings. The first was a basic storage shed filled with firewood and tools. The second contained a generator and some maintenance equipment. The third was locked, with no key provided in our welcome packet. I made a mental note to ask the property manager about it when we returned to civilization. As I walked the perimeter of the property, I noticed how completely isolated we were. The nearest neighbor must have been miles away. The only sounds came from birds, the distant rush of the river below, and the wind through the pines. I should have found it calming, but something about the utter remoteness made me uneasy. I shook off the feeling. We had come here for isolation, after all. Back inside, Heather had prepared a late lunch of sandwiches and chips. "The river looks close," she said, pointing out the window toward the slope. "Maybe we could explore down there after we eat." The children cheered at the suggestion. Even my mother seemed enthusiastic. "I saw a path leading down from the side of the cabin," she offered. I nodded, pushing aside my lingering discomfort. "Sounds perfect." After lunch, we changed into light clothing suitable for exploring. The September air was warm enough for shorts, and we all wore sandals or water shoes, anticipating wet feet at the river's edge. The path from the cabin down to the water was steeper than it had appeared from above, forcing us to pick our way carefully over exposed roots and loose stones. "Hold Ben's hand. Abby," I instructed my daughter as she bounded ahead. My youngest son struggled to navigate the terrain with his short legs. Tom stayed close to my mother, who descended with careful, measured steps. Heather walked beside me, occasionally steadying herself on my arm. "It's gorgeous here," she whispered, not wanting to disturb the forest's tranquility. The afternoon sun filtered through the pine canopy, casting dappled shadows across our path. In these moments, I understood why we had chosen such a remote location. The beauty was undeniable. After about 10 minutes of careful hiking, the trees thinned, and the sound of rushing water grew louder. We emerged onto a wide, pebbly shore, the river flowing clear and fast before us. Mountains rose on the opposite bank, their reflections trembling in the water's surface. "Can we throw rocks?" Tom asked, already scanning the ground for suitable projectiles. "Stay away from the edge," I cautioned. "That current looks strong." The riverbank stretched about 30 yards in either direction before curving out of sight. Small pools had formed along the edges where the current slowed, perfect for the children to splash without risk of being swept away. Soon all 3 kids were giggling and playing, tossing pebbles into the water and competing to make the biggest splash. My mother found a sun-warmed boulder to sit on, smiling as she watched her grandchildren play. Heather and I walked a short distance downstream, enjoying a rare moment of relative privacy. "This was a good idea," she said, squeezing my hand. "The kids needed this." "We all did," I nodded, surveying our surroundings. The beauty was undeniable, yet something still felt off. Perhaps it was just the city dweller in me, uncomfortable with true wilderness. I pushed the thought aside and focused on the moment. We rejoined the others, and I crouched beside Tom to help him skip stones across a calm pool. "Watch this, Dad," he exclaimed, throwing a flat rock that bounced twice before sinking. "Great job, buddy," I praised, selecting a stone for my own attempt. That's when I noticed something moving near Abby's feet. At first I thought it was just a stick floating in the shallow water where she stood. Then it moved against the current. "Abby, step back," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. She looked at me quizzically but obeyed. As I approached her position, I saw another sinuous movement in the water, then another. With mounting horror, I realized what I was seeing: snakes. Dozens of them, small but unmistakable, their diamond-patterned backs barely visible above the water's surface. "Everyone, freeze!" I commanded, my voice tight with controlled panic. "Then slowly move back toward the path." Heather immediately understood the danger. She scooped up Ben, who had been playing nearest to her. "What is it?" my mother asked, rising from her boulder. "Snakes," I said tersely. "Rattlesnakes. They're all around us." Now that I was looking for them, I could see them everywhere, slithering between rocks, coiled in sunny spots, moving through shallow water. The riverbank wasn't just home to a few snakes. We had stumbled upon a major den. "Oh, God," Heather whispered, clutching Ben tighter. The toddler, sensing his mother's fear, began to whimper. "Tom, come to me very slowly," I instructed. He stood frozen about 15 feet away, a stone still clutched in his small hand. "Don't run, just walk very carefully." My son's eyes were wide with fear, but he nodded and began to move toward me with exaggerated slowness. I counted each of his steps, praying he wouldn't startle any of the reptiles. When he was within reach, I grabbed him and lifted him into my arms. "Abby, now you," I said, extending my free hand toward my daughter. She was closer to my mother, who had also realized the danger and was carefully making her way toward her. "I've got her," my mother said, taking Abby's hand. With excruciating slowness, our family regrouped near the forest path. Every movement felt dangerously loud, every step potentially fatal. The rattlesnakes, apparently disturbed by our presence, had begun to move more actively around the riverbank. I hadn't heard any warning rattles yet, but I knew how quickly that could change. "Back up the path," I whispered, carefully. We retreated, maintaining our slow pace until we were well into the forest. Only then did we allow ourselves to move faster, practically jogging up the steep trail toward the safety of the cabin. No one spoke until we reached the clearing, all of us breathing heavily from exertion and fear. "Are they poisonous?" Tom asked, looking up at me with wide eyes. "Very," I answered honestly. "Those were western diamondback rattlesnakes. If one had bitten any of us—" I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't need to. We all understood what I meant. We were hours from the nearest hospital. A venomous snakebite out here could be fatal. "I need to know what we're dealing with," I said, after we had all caught our breath. "I'm going back down with a container to catch one safely. I need to confirm what species they are." Heather looked alarmed. "Is that necessary? Can't we just avoid the river?" "If there are that many by the water, there could be others around the cabin," I explained. "I need to know exactly what we're up against." Despite her protests, I grabbed an empty water bottle and a stick from near the woodpile. "I'll be back in 10 minutes. Get everyone inside and start lunch for the kids." As I descended the path alone, I moved with extreme caution, scanning every inch of ground before stepping. The encounter had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. Those snakes hadn't been there by coincidence. We had stumbled into their territory, a gathering place. The question was, how far did their territory extend? When I returned to the cabin 15 minutes later, water bottle in hand, containing a small but definitive specimen of a western diamondback rattlesnake, I found my mother waiting anxiously on the porch. "The children are inside with Heather," she informed me. "She's making them sandwiches to calm everyone down." "Did you—" She trailed off as I held up the bottle, the young snake coiling defensively inside. Western diamondback, just as I thought. Extremely venomous. "We need to be extremely careful while we're here." My mother nodded gravely. "Perhaps we should consider leaving early." I shook my head. "We've paid for the week, and the drive was exhausting. Let's just be cautious. I'll warn everyone to wear proper shoes, stay on clear paths, and watch where they step." She didn't seem convinced, but didn't argue further. Heather suggested we take a short walk while the children eat, just to clear our heads. The idea appealed to me. I needed to assess our surroundings more thoroughly after the snake encounter. I placed the bottle with the captured snake on the porch railing. I would release it far from the cabin before nightfall, and joined my mother on a walk around the property's perimeter. The forest pressed close on 3 sides of the clearing, ancient pines and firs, creating a dark boundary between our temporary home and the wilderness beyond. We walked in silence for several minutes, both lost in our thoughts, when my mother suddenly grabbed my arm. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I stopped, listening intently. At first I heard nothing unusual, just wind in the trees and distant birdsong. Then came a sound that didn't belong, a low, huffing breath, followed by the snap of breaking branches. "Something's moving in the trees," I whispered back. "Something big." We stood motionless, straining to locate the source of the sound. A flash of movement caught my eye about 100 yards into the forest, a large, dark shape moving between trees. It was too distant to identify clearly, but the size and motion suggested only one thing: bear. "We should get back to the cabin," I murmured, gently tugging my mother's arm. "Don't run, just walk steadily." We maintained a calm pace back to the cabin, though I could feel my heart hammering in my chest. Bears weren't unusual in these mountains, but their proximity to our temporary home was concerning. I'd checked the cabin for bear-proof garbage containers when we arrived, but hadn't found any. We would need to be extremely careful with food waste. As we approached the cabin, I noticed the front door was closed, though we had left it open to air out the musty interior. Through the windows, I could see Heather gesturing animatedly to the children, who were huddled around her at the kitchen table. We entered to find all 4 of them wide-eyed and speaking in hushed tones. "What happened?" I asked immediately. Heather looked up, relief washing over her face. "Thank goodness you're back." "We saw a bear," "We saw one too in the woods," my mother said. "At least we think it was a bear." "This one was definitely a bear," Heather confirmed. "We were eating on the porch, and suddenly it appeared at the edge of the clearing, near the path to the river." Tom nodded vigorously. "It was huge, Dad, with big teeth." "You couldn't see its teeth from that distance," Abby corrected, always the pragmatic one. "But it was standing up and looking right at us." "It made a huffing noise," Heather added. "Then it seemed to smell the food. That's when I gathered everyone and came inside. I moved to the window, scanning the clearing and forest edge. I don't see anything now, but we'll need to be careful. No food outside, and we'll need to store garbage properly." The afternoon passed tensely. We remained inside, playing board games we had brought along and trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy for the children's sake. As the sun began to dip toward the mountains, I stepped onto the porch to assess our situation. The clearing appeared peaceful, with no sign of wildlife, threatening or otherwise. That tranquility was shattered by the sudden roar of an engine. I turned toward the dirt road leading to the cabin just as an ATV burst into view, kicking up a cloud of dust. 2 men rode on it, one driving, one behind, both wearing dirty clothes and baseball caps pulled low over their faces. They slowed as they approached the cabin, the driver cutting the engine to an idle. For a long, uncomfortable moment, they simply sat there, staring at me on the porch. I raised a hand in greeting, unsure what else to do. Neither man returned the gesture. The passenger whispered something to the driver, who nodded slightly. They both continued to stare, their expressions hidden beneath their caps, but their posture unmistakably hostile. "Can I help you?" I called out, trying to sound friendly despite my growing unease. No response. The driver revved the engine once, then turned the ATV in a tight circle and sped back down the road. The encounter lasted less than a minute, but it left me deeply disturbed. In these remote mountains, we were entirely vulnerable. Help, if needed, was hours away. I went back inside, debating whether to mention the strange visitors to my family. Heather noticed my expression immediately. "What's wrong?" she asked quietly, moving away from the children who were engaged in a game of cards with my mother. "Nothing, probably," I answered, keeping my voice low. "Just some locals on an ATV passing by. They seemed odd." "Odd how?" I struggled to articulate what had bothered me about the encounter. "Just the way they looked at the cabin, at me, like they were assessing something." Heather frowned. "Should we be worried?" "No," I said, more confidently than I felt. "Probably just curious about who's renting the place." It's nothing, but it wasn't nothing. Twice more that afternoon, the same ATV passed by our cabin, each time slowing so its occupants could stare at our temporary home. On the third pass, one of them pointed toward the river path, then made a slashing motion across his throat before they sped away. "They're just trying to scare us," I told Heather after describing the gesture. "Locals who don't like tourists in their territory." "Well, it's working," she replied. "I'm scared." As daylight faded, we prepared dinner inside with the doors locked and curtains drawn. None of us mentioned leaving early, but I could feel the thought hanging in the air, unspoken, but growing more appealing with each passing hour. Darkness falls differently in the mountains. It doesn't gradually dim like in the city, where streetlights and buildings hold back the night. Here, when the sun dropped behind the western peaks, darkness swept over the landscape like a flood, absolute and consuming. Inside our cabin, the warm glow of lamps and the crackling fire in the stone hearth created an illusion of safety. But each time I glanced toward the windows, I saw only impenetrable blackness beyond. Dinner had been a subdued affair. The children, sensing the adults' tension despite our efforts to act normal, were unusually quiet. Even Ben, normally a chatterbox during meals, ate his pasta in silence, his eyes frequently darting to the windows. "Who wants to play another game before bedtime?" my mother suggested brightly after we had cleared the dishes. She had always been the one to maintain normalcy in difficult situations, a skill developed over decades of life's challenges. The children responded with half-hearted enthusiasm. As they set up a board game at the kitchen table, Heather pulled me aside. "I don't like this place," she whispered. "First the snakes, then the bear, now those men. Something feels wrong here." I nodded, unable to disagree. "I know, but it's just one night. We'll reassess in the morning. If things still feel off, we can leave then." She seemed unconvinced, but returned to help with the game. I stepped outside onto the porch, ostensibly to check the weather, but really needing a moment alone with my thoughts. The night air was cool and still. Stars blazed overhead with an intensity impossible in the city, their light seemingly close enough to touch. Under different circumstances, I would have found it beautiful or inspiring. Tonight, it only emphasized our isolation. A sound caught my attention, a distant engine growl that rose and fell on the night air. The ATV again? It seemed to be circling somewhere in the forest, never approaching directly, but never truly leaving either. Marking territory, perhaps, or waiting. I returned inside, double-checking that all doors and windows were securely locked. The cabin's ancient locks offered little real security, but they provided some peace of mind. "Bedtime for the little ones," Heather announced after the game concluded. Ben was already yawning, and even energetic Tom looked ready for sleep after the day's excitement and stress. The nightly routine of teeth-brushing and pajamas proceeded normally, though I noticed Heather kept the children closer than usual, never letting them out of her sight even for a moment. When it came time to tuck them into the bunk beds in the small second bedroom, all three children were uncharacteristically clingy. "Can you leave the light on, Daddy?" Abby asked as I pulled her covers up. "Just the small lamp," I agreed, understanding her fear. "I'll be right in the next room if you need anything." "What if the bear comes?" Tom whispered from the bottom bunk. "Bears can't open doors," I assured him, hoping I sounded more confident than I felt. "And they're more afraid of us than we are of them." This was the standard line parents told children about wildlife, though in this case I doubted its truth. The bear we had seen showed no fear of humans, unusual and concerning behavior. "Try to get some sleep," I said, kissing each child's forehead. "Tomorrow we'll have a better day." Back in the main room, my mother had begun preparing the sofa for her bed while Heather sat before the fire, staring into the flames. "The children are worried," I told them, keeping my voice low. "They're not the only ones," my mother replied. "Those men on the ATV, they came by again while you were putting the children to bed." I stiffened. "They did? What happened?" "Nothing, really. They just stopped on the road looking at the cabin. Then they turned off their headlight and sat there in the dark for about 5 minutes before leaving." This news disturbed me deeply. "Why didn't you call me?" "I didn't want to alarm the children," she explained. "And what could we have done? We're hours from anywhere with no cell service." She was right, of course. Our vulnerability in this remote location was absolute. Any help we might need was far beyond reach. "Let's just get through the night," Heather suggested, though her tight expression betrayed her anxiety. "We'll decide in the morning whether to stay or go." We prepared for bed with an unspoken tension hanging in the air. Every creak of the cabin's timbers, every whisper of wind against the windows, set my nerves on edge. I checked the locks one final time before joining Heather in the master bedroom. "Do you think we're overreacting?" she asked as we lay in the darkness, both wide awake despite our exhaustion. "Probably," I said, though I didn't believe it. "It's just being somewhere unfamiliar, with no one else around. Makes normal things seem threatening." "Maybe," she conceded, moving closer to me, "but I can't shake the feeling that something's wrong here. Like we're not supposed to be here." I wrapped an arm around her, offering comfort I didn't feel. "Try to sleep. Things always look better in daylight." But sleep proved elusive. Every sound from the forest, branches scraping against the roof, animals moving in the underbrush, the distant hoot of an owl jolted me back to alertness. When I did drift off, my dreams were fragmented and anxious, filled with shadowy figures and pursuit. I woke sometime in the deepest part of the night to Heather shaking my shoulder. "Listen," she whispered. I held my breath, straining to hear what had alarmed her. At first, There was nothing, just the familiar creaks of the old cabin. Then I heard it, a slow, deliberate scratching at the cabin wall just outside our bedroom window. It paused, then resumed, moving along the exterior as if searching for a way in. "What is that?" Heather breathed, her fingers digging into my arm. "Probably just a branch," I replied automatically, though I knew no trees stood close enough to touch the cabin. The scratching stopped suddenly, replaced by heavy, shuffling footsteps circling the building. Whatever it wasn't human. The weight and cadence suggested something moving on four legs. The bear returning, or something else entirely? We lay frozen in bed, listening as the creature completed its circuit of the cabin, pausing occasionally as if testing the structure for weaknesses. Eventually, the sounds faded and silence returned, but sleep was impossible now. "I want to leave tomorrow," Heather whispered after several minutes. "First thing in the morning," I nodded in the darkness. "Agreed." The rest of the night passed in restless half-sleep, both of us alert to every sound from outside. When the first pale light of dawn finally appeared at the window, I felt a profound relief, as if we had survived some unspoken threat. Morning arrived with deceptive tranquility. Sunlight streamed through the bedroom window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. For a brief, disoriented moment, I forgot the tensions of the previous day and night. Then reality rushed back, and with it the decision we had made in the darkness. "We should start packing after breakfast," I murmured to Heather, who was already awake beside me. "We can be back in Boise by afternoon." She nodded, relief evident in her expression. "I'll start gathering the children's things while you make breakfast." In the main room, we found my mother already up, heating water for coffee on the old stove. "Rough night?" she asked, noting our exhausted appearance. "Something was outside the cabin," I explained quietly, not wanting to wake the children yet. "Circling, scratching at the walls." She nodded, unsurprised. "I heard it too. And something else. Voices, I think. Whispering, just at the edge of hearing." This detail unsettled me. My mother had always been practical to a fault, never one for imagination or embellishment. If she said she heard voices, she heard something. "We're leaving today," Heather informed her. "As soon as we can get packed." "Good," my mother replied simply. "This place, it doesn't want us here." Her phrasing struck me as odd, but before I could ask what she meant, Tom appeared in the doorway of the children's bedroom, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Morning, buddy," I greeted him, forcing cheerfulness into my voice. "How did you sleep?" "There were noises," he said matter-of-factly. "Like animals, but bigger." I exchanged glances with Heather. "Children often perceived things adults missed or dismissed." "Well, we're going to have breakfast and then head home today. Is that okay?" Tom nodded, seeming relieved. "Can I help make pancakes?" The morning proceeded with a forced normalcy. We prepared a hearty breakfast, allowing the children to help mix batter and set the table. Abby and Ben joined us, both unusually subdued, but brightening somewhat at the prospect of pancakes with syrup. None of the children objected when we told them we'd be cutting our trip short. After breakfast, we began systematically packing our belongings. The task was oddly comforting in its mundanity. Folding clothes, gathering toiletries, collecting the board games and books we had brought for entertainment. The cabin gradually returned to its impersonal state, erasing the brief evidence of our presence. Tom was particularly helpful, eagerly carrying small bags to stack by the door and checking under furniture for forgotten items. His energy seemed normal, his color good, his spirits high despite the abbreviated vacation. Nothing in his behavior suggested what was about to happen. We were nearly finished packing, with Heather doing a final sweep of the bedrooms, when Tom suddenly stopped in the middle of the main room. He swayed slightly, then looked up at me with confusion in his eyes. "Daddy," he said, his voice oddly faint. "I don't feel good." Before I could reach him, his legs buckled. I lunged forward, catching him before he hit the floor. His skin, which had been normal minutes before, now burned against mine. "He's burning up," I called to Heather, who rushed into the room. "Feel his forehead." She pressed her hand to our son's face, alarm flooding her expression. "He's on fire, Tom. Tom, can you hear me?" Tom's eyes had gone glassy, his focus drifting somewhere beyond us. His lips moved, but no sound emerged. Most terrifying of all, a slight froth had begun to form at the corners of his mouth. "We need to get him to a hospital," my mother stated, already gathering the remaining bags. "Now." I carried Tom to the sofa while Heather ran for the thermometer in our first aid kit. When she returned, her hands trembled as she placed it in his ear. 3-2, she read, her voice tight with panic. "It's rising fast. He was fine 5 minutes ago." The abruptness of Tom's collapse was the most frightening aspect. He hadn't complained of feeling unwell, hadn't shown any symptoms of an approaching illness. One moment he was helping pack, energetic and normal. The next, he lay semi-conscious, burning with fever, unresponsive to our voices. Could it be a reaction to a snake bite? My mother suggested, though we had seen no evidence of a bite on his exposed skin. Or some kind of mountain virus, Heather added desperately. "Michael, what do we do?" The decision was simple. We leave immediately. The nearest hospital is in Grangeville, about 3 hours from here. I scooped Tom into my arms, alarmed at the heat radiating from his small body. "Finish loading the cars. We need to go now." Within minutes, we had thrown the remaining bags into the vehicles. Heather would drive our car with Tom and Ben. I would take my mother's car with Abby. This arrangement would allow Heather to focus on Tom during the journey while I led the way, hopefully remembering the confusing series of unmarked dirt roads that had brought us here. The sky had darkened considerably while we packed, though it was barely noon. Heavy clouds hung low over the mountains, promising rain and complicating our departure. As I loaded the last bag into my mother's trunk, fat droplets began to fall, quickly intensifying to a steady downpour. "Perfect," I muttered, surveying the rapidly deteriorating conditions. The dirt road would soon become mud, challenging to navigate even in our SUVs. I helped Heather secure Tom in the back seat of our vehicle. He remained unresponsive, his breathing shallow, his skin frightfully hot to the touch. Ben sat beside him, unusually quiet, his small face solemn with worry for his brother. "Drive carefully," I instructed Heather. "Stay right behind me." "If we get separated," I didn't finish the sentence. Getting separated on these mountain roads, in these conditions, with a critically ill child, was unthinkable. Heather nodded, her face pale but determined. "Just get us out of here." With Abby and my mother in her car, I turned the key, relieved when the engine started immediately. Heather's car came to life behind me. Through sheets of rain, I could make out her tense form behind the wheel, leaning forward to peer through the windshield wiper's arc. I pulled away from the cabin, following the rough track that served as a driveway until it connected with the slightly wider dirt road. The surface was already turning slick with mud, forcing me to drive slower than I wanted. Every minute mattered with Tom's condition, but an accident on these remote roads would doom us all. We had traveled perhaps a quarter mile when the forest on either side of the road seemed to close in, branches reaching toward us like grasping fingers in the wind. The rain intensified, drumming on the roof and reducing visibility to mere yards. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, focusing on keeping the car centered on what remained of the visible track. In the rearview mirror, I could see Heather's headlights following, though the distance between us had grown slightly. I slowed further, allowing her to catch up. We needed to stay together, especially now, with night seemingly falling in the middle of the day. As we rounded a bend in the road, my headlights illuminated something that made my heart stop. The ATV from the previous day, parked sideways across the narrow road, blocking our passage completely. Its two riders stood beside it, rain-soaked but seemingly unconcerned, watching our approach with expressionless faces. I slammed on the brakes, the car sliding slightly before catching on the muddy surface. Behind me, Heather's vehicle did the same. "What is it?" my mother asked, leaning forward to peer through the rain-streaked windshield. "Trouble," I answered grimly. "Stay in the car. Lock the doors if I get out." I inched the vehicle forward until we were perhaps 20 feet from the blockade. Close enough to communicate, far enough to react if necessary. I lowered my window slightly, rain immediately spattering inside. "We need to get through," I called out. "We have a medical emergency." Neither man responded. They stood motionless in the downpour, their faces shadowed beneath dripping cap brims. "My son is sick," I tried again, desperation edging into my voice. "He needs a hospital. Please, move your vehicle." One of the men finally stepped forward, stopping just beyond my headlight beams. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice barely audible above the rain. "This place isn't for your kind." The statement was so bizarre, so unexpected, that for a moment I couldn't formulate a response. "We're leaving," I finally managed. "That's what we're trying to do. My son needs medical attention." "Too late for that," the second man called. "The mountains already got him." I felt a cold that had nothing to do with the rain. These men weren't just hostile locals. There was something deeply wrong about them, about this entire situation. "Please," I said, hating the pleading note in my voice, but desperate to get Tom to help. "Just let us pass." The first man stepped closer, his features becoming visible for the first time. His face was gaunt, weathered beyond age, his eyes unnaturally pale against his mud-splattered skin. "You brought it on yourselves," he said, "coming here uninvited. The mountain doesn't like strangers." Behind me, Heather honked briefly, a sound of impatience and fear. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw her gesturing urgently. Tom's condition must be worsening. I made a split-second decision. Turning to my mother and Abby, I ordered, "Seatbelts tight." "Hold on." Then I shifted into drive, pressed the accelerator, and swerved toward the narrow gap between the ATV and the trees. There wasn't quite enough room, but I was counting on the weight and momentum of our vehicle to push the lighter ATV aside. The men jumped back as I accelerated. Metal screeched against metal as we sideswiped the ATV, pushing it several feet before breaking free. In the mirror, I saw Heather following my path, her face set with determination as she navigated the gap I had created. "Are they following?" I asked my mother, who was turned in her seat looking back. "I don't think so," she answered after a moment. "I can't see them anymore in this rain." Relief flooded me, short-lived but intense. We had escaped the immediate threat, but Tom's condition remained critical, and we still faced miles of treacherous mountain roads before reaching help. "Is Tom going to be okay?" Abby asked from beside me, her small voice tight with worry. "We're going to make sure he is," I promised, though doubt gnawed at my certainty. The strange men's words echoed in my mind. The mountains already got him. What did that mean? And why had Tom collapsed so suddenly, without warning or apparent cause? Questions without answers swirled as we continued our desperate journey down the mountain. Rain lashing at our windows and darkness closing in around us. The rain transformed the dirt road into a muddy obstacle course. Each curve brought new challenges. Deep puddles of unknown depth, fallen branches, sections where the road itself seemed to be washing away beneath our tires. I drove with absolute concentration, aware that any mistake could strand us in this wilderness, with Tom's condition deteriorating by the minute. Heather remained close behind, her headlights a reassuring presence in my rearview mirror. Through the rain-streaked glass, I could occasionally glimpse her tense profile, leaning forward over the steering wheel. Once, when the road straightened briefly, I caught a glimpse of Tom in her back seat, now seemingly unconscious, his head lolling against the window. "We need to go faster," I murmured, though I knew it was impossible in these conditions. "You're doing the best you can," my mother said from beside me. "Just keep going." Abby sat quietly in the back seat, her usual chatter silenced by the gravity of our situation. Occasionally, she would ask about her brother, and I would offer reassurances that sounded hollow even to my own ears. We had been driving for perhaps 20 minutes, having covered only a few miles of the tortuous mountain road, when my mother suddenly gripped my arm. "Listen," she whispered. I reduced pressure on the accelerator, allowing the car to slow slightly. At first, I heard nothing beyond the drumming rain and laboring engine. Then it came through, a distant but distinct mechanical growl, rising and falling with the wind. "The ATV," I confirmed grimly. "They're following us. How?" my mother demanded. "We left them behind. There must be other routes through these woods. Trails we don't know about." I pressed the accelerator again, urging more speed from the vehicle despite the dangerous conditions. The sound grew louder, closer. They were gaining on us, using their knowledge of the terrain to cut us off. I scanned the road ahead desperately, looking for any sign of the main highway that would lead us to civilization and safety. "There!" Abby suddenly called from the back seat, pointing through her window. "Daddy, look!" I followed her gesture and saw headlights in the distance, approaching along a road that would intersect with ours in perhaps a quarter-mile. Not the ATV, these were car headlights, meaning we had nearly reached a main road. "Hold on," I instructed, pushing our speed to the absolute limit the conditions would allow. Behind us, Heather matched my pace, understanding from my urgency that something was wrong. The ATV's roar grew louder still, now accompanied by shouts that carried even through the rain and closed windows. They were almost upon us, approaching rapidly from a trail that ran parallel to our road. We reached the intersection just as the ATV burst from the trees to our right. I swerved hard, cutting in front of an approaching logging truck whose driver blasted his horn in alarm. Heather followed, her car fishtailing slightly before regaining traction. The truck driver braked hard, inadvertently blocking the ATV's path and buying us precious seconds. Now, on a paved road, still narrow and winding, but infinitely more navigable than the mud track we had left behind, I allowed myself a moment of cautious optimism. The road signs indicated we were on Highway 14, which would eventually lead us to Grangeville and the hospital Tom desperately needed. The reprieve was short-lived. In my mirror, I saw the ATV emerge from the side road, now carrying 3 men instead of 2. The new addition wore no helmet or cap, his long hair streaming behind him as they accelerated in pursuit. "They're still coming," my mother observed tensely. "Why?" I demanded of no one in particular. "What do they want from us?" The question hung unanswered as I focused on maintaining our lead. The highway curved and twisted through the mountains, each bend revealing new stretches of rain-slick asphalt. Our speed was dangerous, but necessary. The growing distance between us and our pursuers worth the risk. After several more miles, the ATV's headlight finally disappeared from my mirrors. Whether they had given up or simply fallen too far behind to be visible, I couldn't be sure. Still, I maintained our pace, unwilling to take chances with Tom's life hanging in the balance. Heather flashed her lights and honked briefly, catching my attention. When I checked the mirror again, I saw her gesturing urgently, pointing to the side of the road. Understanding, I slowed and pulled onto the narrow shoulder, Heather following suit. I rushed to her car, rain soaking me instantly. She rolled down her window, her face a mask of terror. "It's Tom," she said, her voice breaking. He stopped responding completely. His breathing is getting weaker, and there's foam, more foam around his mouth. I looked past her to the back seat, where Tom lay limp against his car seat restraints. His skin had taken on a greyish pallor beneath the feverish flush, his chest barely moving with shallow breaths. "How far to the hospital?" Heather demanded. "At least 2 more hours," I admitted, the words like ash in my mouth. "He doesn't have 2 hours," she whispered. "Michael, we're going to lose him." The statement hit me like a physical blow. I stood in the pouring rain, paralyzed by the enormity of our situation. My son was dying before our eyes, and we were still deep in the wilderness, too far from help, pursued by strangers with unknown intentions. A sound from the back seat drew my attention, Ben crying softly, his small hand resting on his brother's arm. The sight galvanized me. "We keep going," I decided, "as fast as we can. But first..." I returned to my mother's car and retrieved the water bottle containing the captured rattlesnake. If Tom's condition was caused by a bite we somehow missed, having the specimen might help doctors identify the correct antivenin. Back at our vehicle, I handed the bottle to Heather. "Keep this. It might help the doctors. She nodded, placing it in the cup holder. As I turned to return to my car, a strange thing happened. Tom, who had been completely unresponsive, suddenly stirred. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused but undeniably conscious. "Tom," Heather called, turning in her seat. "Can you hear me?" He didn't respond verbally, but his eyes tracked to the water bottle containing the snake. For a moment, so brief I might have imagined it, his expression changed from vacant to horrified. Then his eyes closed again, and he slumped back into unconsciousness. "Did you see that?" I asked Heather. "He reacted to the snake." She nodded slowly. "It's the first response we've gotten from him in over an hour." Something clicked in my mind, a connection I couldn't fully articulate, but felt with certainty. "Get rid of it," I said suddenly. "What?" "The snake. Throw it out, now." Heather looked bewildered, but didn't argue. She rolled down her window and tossed the bottle into the wet underbrush beside the road. "Now let's go," I urged, already turning back toward my mother's car. "Stay close behind me." We resumed our journey, the roads gradually improving as we descended from the mountains. Signs of civilization appeared with increasing frequency. Gas stations, small clusters of houses, road markers indicating decreasing distance to Grangeville. 20 minutes after discarding the snake, Heather flashed her lights repeatedly. I pulled over once more, fear clutching at my heart. Had Tom's condition worsened further? Was it already too late? I ran to her window, prepared for the worst. Instead, I found her smiling through tears. "He's awake," she said incredulously. "His fever's breaking. Michael, he's asking for water." I looked past her to see Tom sitting up weakly in his seat, pale but alert, his eyes clear and focused. Ben sat beside him, beaming with relief. "Hey, buddy," I called, my voice thick with emotion. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," Tom answered, his voice faint but unmistakably his own. "What happened?" "You got sick," I explained simply. "We're taking you to the doctor." He nodded, accepting this explanation with a child's trust. "Can we go home after?" "Absolutely," I promised. "We're going home as soon as possible." I returned to my car in a daze of confusion and relief. Tom's recovery was as sudden and inexplicable as his illness had been. The timing, immediately after discarding the captured snake, seemed too significant to be coincidence, yet I couldn't rationalize how the two events could be connected. "He's better?" my mother asked as I slid back behind the wheel. "Remarkably so," I confirmed. "His fever's breaking, he's conscious and coherent." She nodded, unsurprised. It was that snake. Having it with us. It was wrong somehow. I glanced at her, startled by how closely her thoughts mirrored my own irrational conclusion. That doesn't make sense. Neither does a healthy child collapsing with a life-threatening fever that disappears the moment you throw away a snake. She countered. I had no response to that. Instead, I started the car and pulled back onto the highway, now driving at a more reasonable pace. The rain had lightened to a drizzle, and the sky ahead showed patches of clearing. We continued toward Grangeville, still intent on having Tom examined by medical professionals despite his apparent recovery. The forest thinned as we descended, the oppressive closeness of the wilderness giving way to open meadows and farmland. With each mile, the strange events at the cabin seemed more distant, more dreamlike. Yet the relief I felt at Tom's recovery was tempered by lingering questions and an unshakable sense that we had narrowly escaped something much worse than we understood. The emergency room doctors were baffled by our story. Tom, who sat on the examination table looking tired but otherwise normal, showed no clinical signs of the terrifying symptoms we described. His temperature was slightly elevated, 99.2 degrees, but nowhere near the dangerous fever that had rendered him unconscious hours earlier. "And you say this came on suddenly?" the attending physician asked, reviewing the notes on his clipboard. "No symptoms beforehand?" "None," Heather confirmed. "He was perfectly fine, helping us pack the car, and then he just collapsed." The doctor performed a thorough examination, checking Tom's reflexes, pupil response, and vital signs. He ordered blood tests, which revealed nothing unusual except slight dehydration. "What about snake venom?" I suggested. "Could it have been a bite we didn't notice?" The doctor examined Tom's exposed skin again, paying special attention to his ankles and feet, where a bite would most likely have occurred. "There's no evidence of a puncture wound or local tissue reaction," he concluded. "And rattlesnake bites typically cause visible symptoms at the site: swelling, discoloration, pain." "But we found a nest of rattlesnakes near the cabin," Heather persisted. "And he improved after we got rid of the snake we captured." The doctor's expression remained professionally neutral, but I could see skepticism in his eyes. "Children can spike fevers rapidly, especially with certain viral infections, and they can recover just as quickly. It's unusual, but not unheard of." We accepted this explanation because we had no alternative that made scientific sense. The doctor prescribed rest, fluids, and over-the-counter fever reducers if needed, then discharged us with instructions to return if Tom's symptoms reappeared. Outside the hospital, standing in the parking lot under a sky now cleared to reveal stars, we faced a decision. "It's almost 10 p.m., I observed. "We can find a hotel in town for the night or push on toward home." "Home," Tom said immediately from his place in Heather's arms. "I want to go home." Heather looked at me, her expression resolute. "I don't want to stay anywhere near those mountains. Let's just drive back to Boise. We can take turns if we get tired." My mother nodded in agreement. "The sooner we put distance between us and that place, the better." The journey back to Boise took nearly 4 hours on the dark highway. Tom slept peacefully in the back seat, his color normal, his breathing deep and regular. Ben dozed beside him, occasionally waking to check on his brother before drifting off again. In the other car, my mother drove while Abby slept, our caravan making steady progress through the night. We arrived home around 2 a.m., exhausted but relieved. The familiar comfort of our house enveloped us as we carried the sleeping children to their beds. No one suggested unpacking the cars. That could wait until morning. For now, simply being home, safe and together, was enough. I awoke late the next morning to find Heather already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring intently at her laptop screen. "What are you researching?" I asked, pouring my own coffee. "The cabin," she replied without looking up, "and the area around it." I joined her at the table, glancing at the screen. She had been searching news archives and local history sites for information about our rental property. "Find anything interesting?" She nodded grimly. The cabin was originally a fire watchman station built in the 1930s. After the Forest Service automated most of their fire detection in the 1980s, it was sold to private owners. There have been several since then, none keeping it for more than a few years. "That's not unusual for a remote property," I pointed out. "It's a lot of maintenance." "True," she conceded. "But look at this." She turned the laptop toward me, displaying a local newspaper article from 2007. The headline read, "Missing Hikers. Vehicle found near abandoned cabin." The story detailed the disappearance of a couple who had been backpacking in the area. Their car was discovered parked near our rental cabin, but despite extensive searches, the hikers themselves were never found. "That's disturbing," I admitted, "but it could be coincidence. Those mountains are vast, and people occasionally get lost hiking." "There's more," Heather said, clicking to another tab. This article from 2012 described a family of 4 who had rented the cabin for a week. On the second day, their 8-year-old daughter became severely ill with an unidentified fever. They left immediately for medical help, but the girl died before reaching the hospital. I felt a chill despite the warm kitchen. The parallels to our own experience were too specific to dismiss. "And this," Heather continued, opening yet another article. "In 2014, just a year before our visit, a man had been found wandering on the highway near Grangeville, disoriented and suffering from exposure. When questioned by police, he claimed he had been staying at the cabin with his brother when they were surrounded by hostile locals who threatened them. He had fled in the night, but his brother stayed behind. Authorities searching the cabin found no sign of the brother, and the case remained open. Why didn't any of this come up when we were researching places to rent? I wondered aloud. The rental listing used a different name for the property, Heather explained. Called it Whispering Pines Retreat instead of Old Watchman's Cabin. I only made the connection when I found it on a map. I sat back, processing this disturbing information. Should we report our experience to someone? The rental agency, at least. I already tried, Heather said. The website is down this morning. The phone number goes to a disconnected message. We fell silent, the implications hanging between us. Had we been deliberately lured to that remote location? Were the strange men on the ATV connected to the previous incidents?
How are the children?
I finally asked, changing the subject to something less unsettling. All fine. Tom slept through the night without any issues. He doesn't remember much about being sick, just feeling dizzy and then waking up in the car. This selective amnesia was perhaps a blessing. Tom had been spared the terror of his own brush with death, unlike Heather and me, who would carry those memories forever. My mother joined us shortly after, accepting a cup of coffee with visible fatigue still lining her face. I've been thinking about something all night, she said without preamble. Something I need to tell you both. Heather closed her laptop, giving my mother her full attention. I did the same, recognizing the serious tone in her voice. The night before we left for that trip, she began slowly, I had a dream, a nightmare really, so vivid that it woke me in the middle of the night. What was it about? I prompted when she paused. Our trip, she answered simply. I dreamed we went to a cabin in the mountains, that we encountered snakes by a river, that a bear appeared near the cabin, that strange men watched us from the forest. The hairs on my arms rose as she recounted dream elements that matched our actual experiences with eerie precision. In the dream, she continued, her voice dropping lower, something terrible happened to one of the children. I saw, her voice broke and tears welled in her eyes. I saw Tom collapse. I saw him die. Heather reached across the table, gripping my mother's hand. But he didn't. He's fine. We all got out safely. My mother nodded, wiping away tears. I know, and that's why I need to tell you this. When I woke from that nightmare, I was terrified. I nearly called you to cancel the trip. But then I told myself it was just anxiety, just my mind playing tricks. I convinced myself not to be superstitious. Mom, you couldn't have known, I assured her. It was just a dream. She shook her head firmly. No, it was a warning. I felt it even then, but I ignored my instincts. And because of that, we nearly lost Tom. The kitchen fell silent except for the soft ticking of the wall clock. Outside, the neighborhood sounds of a normal Sunday morning filtered in. Children playing, a lawnmower, a dog barking. The ordinary world continued, oblivious to our brush with inexplicable horror. I'll never forgive myself for not speaking up, my mother concluded quietly. There's nothing to forgive, Heather insisted. We all made it home. That's what matters. But as we sat in our bright kitchen, surrounded by the comforting trappings of civilization, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had encountered something in those mountains that defied rational explanation. Something ancient and malevolent that had marked us in ways we might never fully understand. Tom appeared in the doorway then, sleep-tousled but healthy, asking for breakfast as if nothing unusual had happened. We rushed to accommodate him, grateful for his recovery, for his innocence, for the second chance we had all been given. Yet even as normalcy reasserted itself, I knew that none of us would ever view the wilderness in quite the same way again. The mountains had shown us their true face, not the benign mask of scenic beauty presented in travel brochures, but something older and darker, something that regarded human visitors as unwelcome intruders to be warned away or destroyed. 1 week after our hasty departure from the cabin, life had largely returned to normal. The children were back in school. Heather and I had resumed our work routines, and the physical evidence of our aborted vacation, the hastily packed bags, the unused hiking equipment, had been properly stored away. Yet beneath this veneer of normalcy, something had fundamentally changed. I found myself starting awake in the middle of the night, certain I had heard heavy footsteps circling our suburban home. Heather developed a habit of checking on the children multiple times before bed, standing in their doorways, watching them breathe. My mother called daily, her conversations filled with oblique references to premonitions and warnings she now felt compelled to share. However trivial, we were changed, all of us, marked by an experience we could neither fully explain nor entirely dismiss. 10 days after our return, I received a phone call from an unfamiliar number with a Grangeville area code. Curious and slightly apprehensive, I answered. "Is this Michael Wilson?" a man's voice asked. "The one who stayed at Watchman's cabin recently." I tensed immediately. "Who's asking?" "My name is Howard Green. I'm a deputy sheriff in Idaho County. We're following up on some reports about activity in that area." My pulse quickened. "What kind of reports?" "Sir, I'd rather discuss this in person if possible. I understand you live in Boise? I'll be down there tomorrow on another matter. Could we meet briefly?" I agreed, arranging to meet the deputy at a coffee shop near my office during lunch the following day. After hanging up, I immediately called Heather to relay the conversation. "Do you think it's legitimate?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "A real deputy?" "I'll verify before meeting him," I assured her. "But if it is, maybe we'll finally get some answers." The next day, I arrived at the coffee shop early, selecting a table with a clear view of the entrance and exits, a precaution that would have seemed paranoid before our experience, but now felt necessary. Deputy Green arrived precisely on time, easily identifiable in his tan uniform with Idaho County Sheriff's Department patches clearly visible. He was older than I had expected, perhaps in his late 50s, with weathered skin and grey hair cut military short. After introducing himself and showing credentials that appeared genuine, he ordered coffee and got straight to business. "We've had reports of men on ATVs harassing visitors in the national forest," he explained, "specifically targeting people staying at or near the old fire watchman station." "That matches our experience," I confirmed, describing the men who had repeatedly circled our cabin and later blocked our escape route. Green nodded, taking notes. "Did they identify themselves or make specific threats?" I recounted the bizarre exchange on the rain-soaked road, their claim that the mountain doesn't like strangers, and the ominous statement that it was too late for Tom. The deputy's expression remained professional, but I noted a tightening around his eyes. "Mr. Wilson, I've been with the department for 23 years. In that time, we've had 7 reported incidents involving that cabin. Yours is the 8th. What kind of incidents?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew from Heather's research. "Missing persons, unexplained illnesses, threatening encounters with locals." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "The problem is we can never find these supposed locals. No one matching the descriptions lives in the area. No registered ATVs, nothing." I leaned forward. "Then who are they?" Green sighed. "That's where it gets complicated. The land where the cabin stands has a history. Before it was national forest, before white settlers even, it was considered special ground by the Nez Perce tribe. Not quite sacred from what I understand, but significant. A place where the boundary between worlds was thin. I felt a chill despite the coffee shop's warmth. "What does that mean exactly?" "According to tribal stories, it was a place where spirits and physical beings could interact more easily than elsewhere. The Nez Perce avoided building or camping there. When the Forest Service constructed the Watchman's cabin in the 1930s, tribal elders protested, but no one listened." "You're suggesting some kind of supernatural explanation," I said flatly, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Green held up his hands. "I'm not suggesting anything, sir. I'm a law enforcement officer. I deal in facts and evidence. All I can tell you is that we've never been able to identify the individuals who harass visitors to that cabin, despite multiple reports over decades." He sipped his coffee before continuing. What interests me about your case is that you all made it out. Most don't, or they leave someone behind. The fact that your son recovered is unusual. The mention of Tom's mysterious illness and equally mysterious recovery brought back the terror of that day with visceral intensity. The doctors couldn't explain it, I admitted, but it started after we found the rattlesnakes and ended after we discarded the one I captured. Green's expression sharpened. You took one of the snakes? To identify it, yes. I caught a young one in a water bottle. And your son became ill after that? I nodded, the timeline suddenly significant in a way it hadn't been before. Yes, within hours, but recovered when you got rid of it? Almost immediately, I confirmed. Though that doesn't make scientific sense. Green was silent for a long moment, turning his coffee cup slowly between weathered hands. Mr. Wilson, I'm going to tell you something off the record. Something not in any official report. I waited, tension building in my chest. My grandfather was Nez Perce, he said quietly. He told me stories about that mountain when I was a boy. He said it was protected by guardian spirits that took the form of animals, snakes, bears, wolves. They were physical, but more than physical. Taking anything from that place, especially one of the guardian creatures, was the gravest offense possible. I thought of the rattlesnake in the water bottle, captured from the riverbank and carried back to the cabin, of Tom's sudden collapse, of his immediate recovery when we discarded it. You think taking the snake caused Tom's illness, I said, the words sticking in my throat. Green shrugged slightly. I'm just telling you the stories I was told. Make of them what you will. And the men on the ATV, according to those same stories, human guardians also protected the place. People who had merged with the mountain somehow, neither fully human nor fully spirit. The description sent a shudder through me, recalling the unnaturally pale eyes of the man who had confronted us on the rain-soaked road, his weathered face seeming older than possible. Why are you telling me this? I asked finally. It's not exactly standard police procedure. Green's expression softened slightly. Because you and your family survived when others didn't, because your son recovered when other children haven't. I thought you deserved some context, however unconventional. He stood, leaving his coffee half-finished. Officially, we're investigating reports of harassment and trespassing in the National Forest. I've taken your statement and will add it to our case file. He extended his hand, which I shook automatically, still processing his revelations. One last thing, he added, his voice lowered. The rental listing for that cabin keeps reappearing under different names, different agencies. We shut it down when we can, but it always comes back. I'd appreciate if you'd warn people if you see it advertised. Of course, I agreed. But why doesn't the Forest Service simply demolish the cabin if it's so problematic? Green's expression turned grim. They've tried. 3 separate demolition crews have refused to complete the job, citing equipment. Failures, worker illness, and in one case, a worker who disappeared overnight from the site. Eventually, they just stopped trying. With that disturbing information, he left, his official demeanor firmly back in place as he exited the coffee shop. That evening, I relayed the conversation to Heather and my mother. We sat in our living room after the children were asleep, speaking in low voices as if the subject matter itself demanded secrecy. It sounds insane, Heather said when I finished, but after what happened to Tom, I believe it, my mother stated firmly. My dream was too specific, too accurate to be coincidence. Something wanted to warn us, and when we ignored the warning, it tried to take Tom. I had always been the skeptic in the family, the one who required logical explanations and empirical evidence. But our experience defied conventional interpretation. Tom's illness had appeared and vanished with impossible speed, perfectly correlated with the presence and disposal of the captured snake. The strange men had known things they couldn't possibly know. My mother's dream had predicted events with uncomfortable precision. "Whether we believe in guardian spirits or not," I said finally, "I think we can all agree on one thing. We were lucky to escape with our lives." Heather nodded, reaching for my hand. "Whatever was there, it let us go, maybe because we returned what we took. Or maybe because we left when we were warned," my mother suggested, "unlike others who might have stayed too long." That night, after Heather had fallen asleep beside me, I lay awake thinking about boundaries. Not just the physical boundaries between wilderness and civilization, but the boundaries between what we understand and what we don't. Between the world as science describes it and the world as it might actually be. I thought of the old watchman's cabin, standing alone on its mountain plateau, surrounded by ancient forest. I wondered who might be renting it now, unsuspecting, unwarned, whether they would notice the rattlesnakes by the river, the bear watching from the tree line, the strange men circling on their ATV. Whether they would recognize the warnings for what they were, or dismiss them as we initially had. Whether they would escape with their lives, or join the growing list of those who entered that thin place between worlds and never fully returned. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that our family would never again venture into remote wilderness. The mountains had shown us their true nature, not as a playground for human recreation, but as an ancient power with its own rules, its own guardians, its own methods of enforcement. Some places do not welcome human intrusion. Some boundaries are not meant to be crossed. Some warnings should never be ignored. This is what I learned on Labor Day weekend 2015, in the shadow of a mountain that does not forgive trespassers. This is the story I will tell my children when they are old enough to understand, to ensure that long after I am gone, they will remember, respect the wild places, heed their warnings, and never, ever take what isn't freely offered. Because sometimes the greatest danger in the wilderness isn't getting lost. It's being found. The untamed wilderness has always beckoned to me, not the sanitized version presented in glossy travel magazines or the carefully controlled environments of popular game reserves, but the raw, unfiltered wildness where nature still holds dominion. My Uncle Gregory and Cousin Winston share this passion, which is why we've made our pilgrimages to mana pools in Zimbabwe as frequently as our urban obligations permit. Mana pools is different from the commercial safaris that attract hordes of camera-wielding tourists. There are no artificially maintained watering holes surrounded by viewing platforms, no scheduled feeding times, no rangers ensuring that dangerous animals keep their distance. In mana pools, you are simply another creature in the ecosystem, vulnerable, watchful, and at the mercy of forces far greater than yourself. "We're going again next month," Gregory announced during our monthly family dinner in Johannesburg. "I've invited some Americans this time, Harold and his wife Beatrice, plus her brother William. They want to see real Africa." He made air quotes and grinned. I nodded, already mentally cataloguing the supplies we'd need. "Did you warn them what they're in for?" Winston laughed, nearly choking on his beer. "I told them they might wake up with an elephant inspecting their tent, but they think I'm exaggerating." "Americans," Gregory said with a shrug. "They've watched too many documentaries where the dangerous animals are filmed with telephoto lenses from the safety of a vehicle." "Well, they'll get their money's worth at Mana," I said. "When was the last time we went a trip without something trying to kill us?" We reminisced about past expeditions, the time a hippo had charged our camp at dusk, forcing us to scramble up trees, the morning we'd discovered lion tracks circling our tents, the afternoon when a bull elephant had shredded our supplies while we watched helplessly from a safe distance. These memories weren't cautionary tales to us. They were badges of honor, proof that we had experienced Africa in its most authentic form. What we didn't know then was that our upcoming trip would make these past encounters seem trivial by comparison. As the designated firearms expert of our group, I took responsibility for our protection. My .375 rifle and Colt 1911 handgun weren't just accessories. They were essential tools in an environment where humans have relinquished their position at the top of the food chain. I've never had to shoot to kill, but I've fired warning shots more than once. The weeks before our departure passed quickly. I refreshed my first aid certification, Gregory serviced the truck, and Winston handled logistics. We met with the Americans several times to prepare them, though I suspect they didn't fully comprehend what awaited them. Harold, a gregarious businessman in his 50s, treated the whole thing like an adventure package he'd purchased. His wife, Beatrice, approached it with an academic interest, having read several books on African wildlife. Her brother William, however, seemed genuinely nervous, asking detailed questions about safety protocols and emergency evacuation procedures. "Don't worry," I assured him during our final meeting. "We've been doing this for years. Just follow our lead and you'll be fine." I believed that when I said it. After all, we were experienced bushmen. We knew how to read the landscape, identify potential dangers, and respond appropriately. What I didn't account for was encountering something that defied all our experience, something that shouldn't exist in any rational world. The journey to Mana Pools is itself a transition from civilization to wilderness. As we drove north from Harare in our heavily loaded Land Cruiser, the towns grew smaller, the roads rougher, and the landscape wilder. Concrete gave way to dirt, streetlights to star-filled skies, and the constant hum of urban life to the diverse symphony of the bush. "Look," Gregory said, pointing through the windshield as we approached the park boundaries. Impala Crossing. A herd of the graceful antelope bounded across the road, their distinctive black markings contrasting against tawny coats. Beatrice fumbled for her camera, but they were gone before she could capture the moment. "You'll see plenty more," Winston assured her. "They're everywhere in Mana." As we entered the park, the road deteriorated further, forcing us to slow to a crawl over washboard sections and through deep ruts carved by the previous rainy season. The Americans clutched their seats, exchanging wide-eyed glances as the vehicle pitched and rolled. "Is this safe?" William asked, his knuckles white against the door handle. "Safer than what we'll be doing later," I replied with a grin. We reached our designated campsite by mid-afternoon. Unlike the more developed areas of the park, our chosen spot had no facilities beyond a cleared area for tents and a simple fire pit ringed with stones. What it did have was unparalleled proximity to the Zambezi River, which flowed broad and brown about 30 meters from where we parked. "We need to set up quickly," Gregory instructed as we unloaded gear. "Nightfall comes suddenly here, and we want everything secure before dark." The Americans helped as best they could, though their inexperience slowed us down. While Gregory supervised tent assembly, Winston established our food preparation area, and I conducted a perimeter check, looking for signs of recent animal activity. The soil near the river was soft enough to hold impressions, and I quickly found evidence of our neighbors. Elephant tracks, massive and unmistakable, crisscrossed the area. Lion prints, their distinctive round shape and absence of claw marks identifying them clearly, followed what appeared to be a game trail leading to the water. I spotted the three-toed tracks of zebra, the delicate impressions of various antelope, and the distinctive drag mark of a monitor lizard's tail. This was all normal and expected. What caught my attention, however, was a set of prints I couldn't immediately identify. They measured approximately 30 centimeters long by 15 wide, with digitigrade pressure points, suggesting a creature that walked on its toes rather than flat-footed. They resembled primate tracks in their overall shape, but the proportions were wrong, too elongated, with what appeared to be claw marks at the tips. I crouched for a closer examination. Running my fingers along the edge of one impression, the track was fresh, probably from earlier that same day. "Find anything interesting?" Gregory's voice startled me. I straightened up and pointed. "What do you make of these?" He knelt beside me, squinting at the strange tracks. After a moment, he shrugged. Probably one of those big baboons. The soil can distort impressions. I've seen plenty of baboon tracks, I counted. These are different. Maybe it was injured, he suggested, already losing interest. Or it could be a civet or some other nocturnal creature. I wasn't convinced, but I didn't press the issue. We had work to do, and unusual animal tracks were a common occurrence in the bush. Still, I found myself returning to check those prints several times over the next few hours, an inexplicable unease growing each time I studied them. By sunset, our camp was fully established. 3 tents formed a rough semicircle facing the river, with our cooking area at the center. I had hung my hammock between 2 sturdy acacia trees, preferring to sleep under the open sky when possible. My rifle rested within arm's reach of the hammock, loaded, but with the safety engaged. As darkness descended, we gathered around the fire. The temperature dropped rapidly, as it always does in the African bush, and we huddled closer to the flames. Above us, the sky transformed into a dazzling display of stars, unpolluted by artificial light and stretching horizon to horizon in a cosmic panorama that always left me feeling simultaneously insignificant and privileged. "It's so quiet," Beatrice whispered, as if afraid to disturb the silence. "Not for long," Winston said, feeding another log to the fire. "Wait until the night hunters start calling." As if on cue, the distinctive whooping of hyenas echoed across the plain, followed by the resonant roar of a male lion staking his territorial claim. The Americans tensed visibly, their eyes scanning the darkness beyond our firelight. "Are they close?" William asked, his voice higher than normal. "Sound carries in the bush," I explained. "That lion is probably a kilometer away, maybe more. But we'll keep the fire going through the night just to be safe." We shared a meal of grilled burrawers sausage and bush bread, accompanied by cold beer from our solar-powered cooler. As we ate, Gregory entertained our guests with tales from previous expeditions, some embellished for dramatic effect, but most terrifyingly accurate. I found my attention drifting repeatedly to the darkness beyond our circle of light. Something felt wrong tonight, though I couldn't articulate what. The usual night sounds were present, insects buzzing, the occasional splash from the river as fish jumped or crocodiles moved, distant animal calls. Yet something seemed off balance, as if the normal rhythm of the bush had been disrupted by an unnatural presence. "You're jumpy tonight," Winston observed quietly when the others were engaged in conversation. "Just being cautious," I replied, but we both knew it was more than that. Winston and I had grown up together, spending countless nights in the wilderness. We could read each other as easily as tracking spoor in wet sand. "Those tracks bothering you?" I nodded. "Something's not right. I can feel it." Winston didn't dismiss my concern. "In the bush, intuition often means survival. We'll take shifts tonight. I'll wake you at 2. I agreed, grateful for his understanding without explanation. As our American guests retired to their tents, expressing a mixture of excitement and trepidation about sleeping in such wild surroundings, I performed one last check of our perimeter. The tracks I'd found earlier were now partially obscured by our own footprints, but still discernible. In the beam of my flashlight, they seemed even more unnatural than they had in daylight. The splayed toes too articulated for an animal, the stance too wide for a normal human. A breeze whispered through the acacia thorns, carrying a scent I couldn't identify, musky, pungent and vaguely rotten, like meat left too long in the sun. I raised my head, nostrils flaring as I tried to pinpoint its direction, but it was gone as quickly as it had come. That night, as I lay in my hammock staring up at the stars, rifle resting across my chest, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Not by the familiar predators of the African bush, but by something else, something that had no place in the natural order of things. The rising sun painted the eastern horizon in vivid hues of orange and gold, casting long shadows across our campsite. I had slept fitfully despite Winston's vigilance during his watch, plagued by half-remembered dreams of movement just beyond the firelight. "Coffee?" Gregory offered, already heating water over the rekindled fire. I nodded gratefully, accepting the steaming mug. Anything happened during your watch? Just the usual. Hippos grunting in the river. Hyenas passed by about 100 meters out, but they weren't interested in us. He paused, studying my face. You look like hell. Didn't sleep well, I admitted. Our American guests emerged from their tents one by one, bleary-eyed but animated. They had survived their first night in the African bush, and their relief was palpable. I heard animals moving around all night, Harold said, accepting a cup of coffee. Something large brushed against our tent at one point. Probably a buffalo, Gregory replied. They often come through the campsite. As long as you stay quiet inside your tent, they'll ignore you. After breakfast, I suggested we explore our immediate surroundings to familiarize ourselves with the terrain. The Americans readily agreed, eager to experience the wilderness up close. Stay close together, I instructed as we set out, rifles slung over my shoulder. Don't wander off, and if I raise my hand like this, I demonstrated a flat-palmed halt signal, freeze immediately and wait for instructions. We followed the riverbank downstream, moving slowly and quietly. The Zambezi stretched wide before us, its surface glittering in the morning sun. Hippos wallowed in the deeper channels, only their eyes, ears and nostrils visible above the waterline. On the opposite shore, a herd of elephants drank, their massive grey forms reflected in the still water near the bank. This is incredible, Beatrice whispered, her camera clicking constantly. I've never felt so immersed in nature, I smiled, understanding her sentiment. Despite my unease from the night before, the African bush still held its magic. We were witnesses to scenes that had played out for millennia, part of an ancient cycle of life and death that continued regardless of human presence. About half a kilometer from our camp, I noticed fresh tracks crossing our path, the same unusual prints I'd observed the previous day. They emerged from dense riverside vegetation and headed inland, toward the higher ground where the Mopan forest began. I crouched to examine them more closely, motioning for the others to wait. These impressions were even clearer than the ones near our camp, pressed into mud that had yet to fully dry from the morning dew. The strange digit pattern was unmistakable. 5 toe-like projections, but arranged differently from a human foot, with what appeared to be opposable digits on both sides. "What is it?" Harold asked, peering over my shoulder. I hesitated, reluctant to voice my growing suspicion that these weren't from any animal I recognized. "Not sure. Some kind of primate, maybe." Gregory joined us, frowning at the tracks. "Still thinking about these, are you?" "They're everywhere," I pointed out. "And they're fresh." Winston, who had been scanning the tree line, spoke without turning around. "There's something else too. Listen." We fell silent. At first, I heard only the ambient sounds of the bush, water lapping at the riverbank, birds calling, the distant rumble of hippos. Then I noticed what Winston had already perceived: absence. The normal chatter of vervet monkeys that should have filled the canopy was conspicuously missing. The warning calls of francolin birds had gone quiet. Even the cicadas had ceased their constant drone. "The bush is too quiet," I murmured. "What does that mean?" William asked, his earlier nervousness returning. "It means something has disturbed the natural order," Winston explained. "Predator presence usually. Lion, leopard," Harold suggested. I shook my head slowly. "Wildlife adapts to normal predators. This is different. Everything's gone silent." As if to punctuate my statement, a low, resonant sound drifted through the trees, not quite a growl, not quite a moan, but something between the two, with a quality that raised the hair on my arms. "What was that?" Beatrice whispered, instinctively moving closer to her husband. "Time to head back to camp," I said firmly, straightening up and readjusting my rifle strap. We returned with considerably more haste than we had departed. All pretense of casual exploration abandoned. I took the rear position, frequently glancing behind us while Gregory led the way. The Americans, sensing our concern, asked no questions until we reached the relative safety of our campsite. "Okay, what was that sound?" Harold demanded once we were seated around the unlit fire pit. "And don't tell me it was nothing to worry about, because I saw how you both reacted." Gregory and I exchanged glances. "Honestly, I'm not certain," I admitted. "Could have been a leopard with prey." The explanation sounded hollow even to my ears, but I had nothing better to offer. Whatever had made that sound, it wasn't like anything I'd heard in 20 years of bush experience. "I think we should check out the river downstream," Winston suggested, deliberately changing the subject. "There's supposed to be great fishing about 3 kilometers from here. I saw some other campers set up down there when we drove in. The idea of connecting with other humans suddenly held tremendous appeal. We agreed to take the small aluminum boat we'd brought along, with Winston and me making the initial journey to scout the location. As we prepared the boat, Gregory pulled me aside. "Keep your eyes open," he said quietly, "and your rifle ready." "You don't need to tell me twice," I replied, checking that my sidearm was secure in its holster. The river flowed slow and wide here, making our downstream journey easy. Winston managed the small outboard motor while I sat in the bow, scanning both shorelines with watchful eyes. We passed pods of hippos who regarded us with suspicious stares, their massive bodies shifting beneath the water. Crocodiles basked on sandbanks, barely acknowledging our passage. About 40 minutes into our journey, we spotted the other campsite, a small clearing similar to our own, with 2 tents and a pickup truck visible among the trees. A man stood at the water's edge, casting a fishing line into the river. "Hello, the camp!" Winston called as we steered toward shore. The man turned, visibly startled by our appearance. He was middle-aged, perhaps in his 40s, with the weathered look of someone who spent considerable time outdoors. Yet despite his apparent experience, something in his demeanor struck me immediately. A tension in his shoulders, a wariness in his eyes that went beyond normal caution. "Afternoon," he responded as we beached our boat. "Didn't expect to see anyone else out here." "We're camped upstream," I explained, stepping onto the bank. "Thought we'd check out the fishing down this way." The man, who introduced himself as Joseph, seemed to relax marginally as we explained our presence. He mentioned he was here with his brother, who was currently resting in one of the tents. "Any luck with the fish?" Winston asked, gesturing toward the river. Joseph shook his head. "Not much. Something's off today. The fish aren't where they should be, and I haven't seen the usual crocodiles hunting." I glanced around their camp, noting how everything appeared hastily arranged, lacking the methodical organization that experienced bushmen typically maintain. Their vehicle showed signs of recent damage. The front grille was dented, and one headlight was shattered. "Trouble with the truck?" I inquired casually. Joseph's expression darkened. "Hit something last night. Came out of nowhere across the access road." "Animal?" Winston asked. "Something like that," Joseph replied vaguely, then abruptly changed the subject. "How long are you planning to stay in Mana?" "Another 5 days," I answered, increasingly aware of his discomfort. "You?" "We're leaving tomorrow. Just waiting for my brother to fix the radiator." His eyes darted toward the tree line behind us, then back. "If I were you, I'd consider cutting your trip short. There's been unusual activity in this section of the park." "What kind of activity?" I pressed. Joseph hesitated, conflict evident on his face. Finally, he lowered his voice despite the fact that we were the only ones present. "Listen, I've been coming to Mana for 15 years. I know what belongs here and what doesn't. Last night, something came into our camp that doesn't belong." A chill settled between my shoulder blades despite the afternoon heat. "What did you see?" "I didn't see much. It was dark, but it was big, taller than a man moving on 2 legs. It damaged our truck trying to get at the cooler inside." He paused, then added with obvious reluctance, "And it wasn't alone." Winston and I exchanged glances. "Did you report it to the rangers?" Winston asked. Joseph gave a hollow laugh. "Rangers don't come to this section after dark. Besides, what would I tell them? That we were attacked by some kind of giant baboon. They'd breathalyze me." The conversation grew increasingly uncomfortable after that. Joseph clearly regretted having shared as much as he had, and soon made excuses about needing to check on his brother. As we pushed our boat back into the current, I couldn't shake the impression that he'd left a great deal unsaid. "He's terrified," Winston observed quietly as we motored back upstream. "With good reason. If something really did attack their camp," I replied, "did you notice his hands?" "I hadn't specifically." "What about them?" "They were shaking, and there was blood under his fingernails, dry, dark blood that he hadn't fully washed away." The observation sent a deeper chill through me. Something was very wrong downstream, and we were heading back to a camp with 3 inexperienced Americans who had no idea what kind of danger might be lurking in the African bush. When we returned to camp, the sun had begun its descent toward the western horizon, casting an amber glow across the landscape. Gregory had taken our guests on a short game drive while we were gone, and they were animatedly discussing their sightings: a pride of lions, a tower of giraffes drinking from a waterhole, a massive crocodile dispatching a zebra that had ventured too close to the river's edge. "It was incredible," Beatrice exclaimed, her earlier trepidation replaced with exhilaration. The zebra never saw it coming. One moment it was drinking, the next it was thrashing in the water with this enormous crocodile clamped onto its muzzle. "Nature red in tooth and claw," Harold quoted with evident satisfaction. Their enthusiasm faded as Winston and I recounted our encounter with Joseph. I deliberately softened some details, but conveyed the essential warning. Something unusual and potentially dangerous was active in this section of the park. "What do you think it is?" William asked, his earlier nervousness returning tenfold. "Some kind of escaped predator?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But we need to take extra precautions tonight." Gregory nodded in agreement. "We'll keep the fire larger than usual and set up a proper watch rotation." He turned to our guests. "No one leaves their tent after dark without announcing themselves first. And no one, absolutely no one, wanders away from camp alone, day or night." As evening approached, we prepared more thoroughly than usual. Gregory checked every tent stake and guy line to ensure they were secure. Winston established a secondary fire pit at the perimeter of our camp, creating a wider circle of light. I cleaned my rifle and pistol, leaving both readily accessible. The Americans watched these preparations with growing concern. William, in particular, seemed on the verge of suggesting we pack up and leave immediately. To be honest, part of me wished we could, but I knew attempting to navigate the rough park roads after dark would create its own dangers. Dinner that night was a subdued affair. Even Harold's normally boisterous storytelling was muted, his jokes falling flat in the tense atmosphere. As full darkness descended, the usual night sounds of the bush seemed amplified, every rustle in the undergrowth, every distant animal call drawing our attention. I took the first watch, positioning myself on a camp chair with clear sightlines in all directions. My rifle rested across my knees, loaded and ready. The others retired to their tents with obvious reluctance, leaving me alone with the crackling fire and the vast African night. Hours passed without incident. The half-moon provided additional illumination, casting silver light across the open ground between our camp and the river. Hippos emerged to graze, their massive forms moving with surprising grace despite their bulk. A small herd of impala passed cautiously through the outer edge of our firelight, their eyes reflecting the flames as they paused to assess the threat we posed before continuing on their way. It was during this peaceful interlude that I first noticed the strange silence falling over the area. The constant background chorus of insects suddenly diminished, then stopped altogether. The distant calls of nightjars went quiet. Even the hippos, normally vocal as they fed, grew still. I straightened in my chair, every sense alert. Something had disturbed the natural rhythm of the bush, something that every creature in the vicinity recognized as a threat. My eyes scanned the darkness beyond our firelight, searching for movement. At first I saw nothing unusual. Then at the very limit of visibility, where the silver moonlight met the black shadows of the Mopani forest, something moved. It was tall, far taller than any human, and seemed to be standing upright on two legs. Its proportions were wrong somehow, the limbs too long and oddly jointed. It remained at the edge of perception, never fully emerging from the shadows. But I had the distinct impression it was watching our camp with calculating intelligence. I reached slowly for my rifle, keeping my movements deliberate and minimal. As my hand closed around the familiar wooden stock, the figure in the darkness shifted slightly, and then, impossibly, it was joined by a second and a third, all maintaining that same unnatural stillness at the periphery of visibility. My mouth went dry. An unusually large animal could be explained away, a bull elephant standing peculiarly, perhaps, or some trick of moonlight and shadow. But multiple figures, all with the same unnatural proportions, all watching with the same predatory stillness. This defied rational explanation. I needed to alert the others, but calling out seemed suddenly dangerous, an admission of awareness that might trigger whatever these things were to action. Instead, I rose slowly from my chair, rifle held ready, and backed toward the nearest tent. "Gregory," I whispered urgently, tapping on the canvas. "Wake up, we have company." I heard movement inside, then the quiet zip of the tent flap. Gregory emerged, instantly alert despite having been asleep moments before. "Where?" he murmured, reaching for his own rifle. I indicated the tree line with a slight nod. 3 of them. At the edge of the forest. Gregory squinted into the darkness, then stiffened as he spotted what I'd seen. "What the hell are those?" "I don't know, but they've been watching us for at least 10 minutes. Wake the others," he decided, quietly. "We need everyone alert." One by one, we roused the camp. Winston immediately took up a defensive position opposite mine, creating crossfire coverage of the most likely approach routes. The Americans huddled near the central fire, their faces pale in the flickering light. "What do they want?" Beatrice whispered, clutching her husband's arm. "Unknown," I replied honestly. "But they haven't approached while we're awake and alert, which suggests they're cautious, or waiting for something," Winston added grimly. As if responding to his words, one of the figures at the tree line moved, not toward us, but parallel to our position, circling toward the river. The others followed, maintaining their distance, but clearly executing some kind of coordinated maneuver. "They're trying to cut off our access to the boat," Gregory observed. I nodded, the implications clear. Whatever these creatures were, they possessed tactical intelligence. They understood that the river represented our escape route, and they were methodically eliminating that option. "We need to move now," I decided. "While we still have a path to the truck." No one argued. With practiced efficiency born of years in the bush, we began breaking camp. Not the orderly packing we'd normally employ, but a rapid triage of essentials. Sleeping bags were abandoned. Food supplies were left behind. We focused on water, weapons, and medical supplies. The Americans followed our lead, though their inexperience showed in their frantic movements and frequent glances toward the darkness where the creatures lurked. William in particular seemed on the verge of panic, fumbling with simple tasks and startling at every sound. We had nearly finished loading the essential gear into the truck when the first scream tore through the night. Not from our camp, but from downstream in the direction of Joseph's campsite. It was a human sound filled with terror and pain, abruptly cut short. "Oh God," Beatrice gasped, her face ashen. "Get in the truck," Gregory ordered, his voice leaving no room for debate. "Everyone, now." We didn't need to be told twice. Within seconds, we were all inside the vehicle, doors locked and engine running. Gregory took the wheel, while Winston and I maintained vigilance through the windows. Rifles ready. As we pulled away from the campsite, headlights illuminating the track ahead, I glanced back one final time. What I saw in that moment will forever remain etched in my memory. 3 figures stood in our abandoned camp, fully visible now in the retreating glow of our dying fire. They were vaguely humanoid, but wrong in every particular, standing over 3 meters tall, with disproportionately long limbs and bodies covered in what appeared to be short, dense fur. Their faces turned now to watch our departure. were flat and expressionless, with eyes that reflected our headlights like those of nocturnal predators. But most disturbing of all was the deliberate, almost ceremonial way they moved through our camp, not ransacking or destroying in animal fashion, but examining, inspecting, as if conducting some bizarre inventory of human artifacts. "Drive," I urged Gregory, my voice barely audible over the engine and my own pounding heart. "Drive now." The truck bounced violently as Gregory navigated the rough track at dangerous speed, far faster than the terrain warranted. No one complained. The horrific scream from downstream still echoed in our minds, and the memory of those tall figures methodically examining our abandoned camp drove us forward with desperate urgency. What were those things? Harold demanded, his earlier bravado entirely evaporated. They looked like... I don't know what they were, I cut him off, unwilling to fuel speculation when we needed clear heads. But they're territorial, intelligent, and hunting in packs. That makes them extremely dangerous. We need to alert the rangers, Beatrice insisted, clutching the seat in front of her as we bounced through a particularly deep rut. Other people could be in danger. She was right, of course. But reaching park headquarters meant traversing nearly 40 kilometers of rough roads through the darkness, roads that might be watched by more of those creatures. Our immediate priority had to be reaching the main access road, where we'd have better visibility and faster escape options. The track narrowed as we approached a section that cut through dense mopane woodland. Trees pressed close on both sides, their branches occasionally scraping against the vehicle's roof and sides. Our headlights created a tunnel of visibility that extended only a few meters ahead, with impenetrable darkness beyond. "Slow down," Winston cautioned Gregory. "We can't afford to break an axle out here." Gregory reduced our speed, though his knuckles remained white on the steering wheel. We proceeded more cautiously through the forest tunnel, everyone scanning the encroaching vegetation for signs of movement. The attack, when it came, was not from the sides as I'd feared, but from above. Something heavy landed on the roof of the truck with a resounding impact that dented the metal inward, Beatrice screamed. William covered his head with his arms, as if expecting the roof to collapse entirely. "Keep driving!" I shouted to Gregory, who had instinctively braked at the impact. The truck lurched forward again, as something scraped across the roof toward the front windshield. Through the glass, I caught a glimpse of long, powerful limbs and reflected eyes before the creature abruptly shifted position, moving to the hood of the vehicle. For an instant, we had a clear view of our attacker, illuminated in the glow of our headlights as it clung to the hood. It matched the figures we'd seen at our camp, impossibly tall and gaunt, with elongated limbs and a face that seemed almost masked in its expressionlessness. But now we could see additional details. Its hands, which terminated in curved, talon-like appendages, its mouth, lipless and filled with jagged teeth, and its eyes, which studied us with a predatory intelligence that was unmistakably intentional. Gregory swerved sharply, attempting to dislodge the creature. It maintained its grip on the hood, those talon-like fingers puncturing the metal as it adjusted its position. Then, with deliberate force, it slammed one fist against the windshield, creating a spiderweb of cracks in the glass. "Shoot it!" Harold yelled, pressing himself against the back seat. I had already raised my rifle, but hesitated. Firing through the windshield would compromise our only barrier between us and the creature. Before I could decide, Winston rolled down his side window and leaned out, aiming his own weapon at the beast. The gunshot was deafening inside the confined space of the vehicle. The creature recoiled as the bullet struck it in the shoulder, black fluid spraying from the wound. For a moment, it seemed stunned, its expressionless face turning toward Winston as if registering genuine surprise. Then it leapt away into the darkness with astonishing agility, vanishing into the trees beside the track. "Go, go, go!" I urged Gregory, who needed no encouragement. The truck surged forward, tires throwing up clouds of dust as we accelerated through the forest tunnel. "Did you kill it?" William asked, his voice trembling. Winston pulled himself back inside, rolling up the window. "I hit it, but it moved too fast to tell how badly it was injured." "What about the others?" Beatrice asked, scanning the darkness outside with wide eyes. "You said there were 3. As if in answer to her question, something large and heavy struck the rear of the truck, causing the vehicle to fishtail momentarily before Gregory regained control. Another impact followed almost immediately, this time against the driver's side door, denting the metal inward. "They're trying to force us off the road," Gregory shouted over the engine's roar. I braced myself against the dashboard as he swerved to avoid another moving shadow that lunged toward us from the right. We were surrounded, the creatures coordinating their attacks with an intelligence that seemed impossible for wild animals. "There!" Winston suddenly exclaimed, pointing ahead. "The tree line ends. We're almost at the main access road." The forest was indeed thinning, the track widening as we approached the junction with the larger gravel road that served as the park's main artery. If we could reach it, we'd have better visibility and a clearer path to the ranger station. One final surge of acceleration brought us bursting from the forest onto the open road. Gregory executed a sharp turn toward the north, where we knew park headquarters awaited some 20 kilometers distant. For several minutes, we drove in tense silence, everyone straining to see if our pursuers had followed us into the open. The cracked windshield distorted the view ahead, but the headlights revealed nothing but empty road. "I think we lost them," Harold ventured cautiously, his voice still unsteady. I wasn't convinced. Those creatures had demonstrated too much intelligence, too much purpose in their actions to simply abandon the chase. More likely they were. A tremendous impact against the rear of the truck interrupted my thoughts, sending us into a skid. Gregory fought the wheel as we fishtailed across the gravel surface, nearly rolling, before he managed to stabilize our trajectory. "They're still with us," Winston shouted, pointing to the side mirror where a dark shape could be seen bounding along the road behind us. The creature moved with impossible speed, covering ground in great loping strides that no human could match. As it closed the distance, a second figure emerged from the tree line ahead of us, positioning itself in our path. Gregory had no choice but to swerve. The truck left the road, bouncing violently across the uneven terrain of the savannah. One of the headlights shattered as we struck a termite mound, plunging half our forward visibility into darkness. "Head for the river," I directed, gripping the dashboard as we jolted across the landscape. "We can't outrun them on open ground." The Zambezi was less than a kilometer to our east. If we could reach it, perhaps the creatures would be reluctant to pursue us into the water, where crocodiles and hippos represented threats even to large predators. Gregory adjusted our course, the remaining headlights sweeping across grass and scattered trees as we charged toward the river. Behind us, the pursuing creatures had been momentarily confused by our change of direction, but they quickly adjusted, 2 dark shapes bounding through the moonlight in our wake. We crested a small rise, and the river appeared before us, a silver ribbon cutting through the darkness. Gregory aimed for a section where the bank sloped gradually down to the water, perfect for our desperate approach. "Everyone out as soon as we stop," I instructed, checking that my pistol was secure in its holster. "Head straight for the water and wade in up to your chests. Stay together." The truck skidded to a halt at the riverbank, engine still running. We exploded from the doors, Gregory and Winston taking defensive positions with their rifles, while Harold helped Beatrice and William toward the water. I brought up the rear, scanning the darkness behind us. They emerged from the tall grass 50 meters away, all 3 creatures moving with that same eerily deliberate gait. One was visibly injured, black fluid still seeping from the shoulder wound Winston had inflicted, but it showed no sign of pain or impairment. "Go," I shouted to Gregory and Winston. "Get to the water!" They backed toward the river, rifles raised, as I maintained my position. The creatures paused, forming a loose semicircle just beyond effective rifle range. Their behavior suggested calculation, rather than the instinctive caution of normal predators. I fired a warning shot into the ground before them. They didn't flinch or retreat. Instead, the central figure, larger than the others and seemingly the leader, took a deliberate step forward. In the silver moonlight, I could see its face clearly now, not an animal's muzzle, but a flattened approximation of human features, with eyes set too wide apart and a mouth that stretched nearly from ear to ear. It raised one elongated arm, talon-like fingers extending in a gesture that seemed almost like communication. A sound emerged from its lipless mouth, not a growl or roar, but something more modulated, almost like speech distorted through a broken electronic device. The other two creatures shifted position, spreading wider as if preparing to flank me. I fired again, this time aiming directly at the leader. At this range I couldn't miss. The bullet struck center mass, and the creature staggered backward with the impact. But instead of falling, it merely looked down at the wound, then back at me with those reflective eyes. This was my cue to retreat. I backed toward the water, keeping my rifle trained on the trio. They followed, maintaining the same distance, neither rushing nor hesitating. The cool water of the Zambezi reached my knees, then my thighs, as I backed deeper into the river. The others were already chest-deep, Gregory and Winston positioned protectively in front of our American guests. At the water's edge, the creatures finally stopped. The leader tilted its head, studying our partially submerged forms with evident curiosity. Then it made that strange vocalization again, a series of clicks and whistles that almost formed a pattern. "What do they want?" Beatrice whispered, her teeth chattering from fear and the cold water. None of us had an answer. We remained in the river, watching as the creatures maintained their vigil on the shore. Minutes stretched into an hour. My arms grew tired from holding the rifle above water level. The night air chilled our exposed upper bodies. "We can't stay here indefinitely," Gregory finally said. "It'll be dawn in a few hours. Maybe they're nocturnal. If we can hold out until sunrise." It was a slim hope, but the only one we had. The alternative, attempting to leave the water and somehow reach the abandoned truck, seemed suicidal with those creatures still watching from the shore. Another hour passed. My limbs grew numb from the cold water. William had begun showing signs of hypothermia, his face pale and movements sluggish despite Beatrice and Harold's efforts to keep him warm. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, the eastern horizon began to lighten. Pre-dawn glow seeped into the sky, gradually revealing the landscape in shades of grey and blue. The creatures noticed the change as well. The leader turned its head toward the growing light, then made another of those strange vocalizations. Its companions responded immediately, backing away from the shoreline with obvious reluctance. "They're leaving," Winston breathed, not daring to raise his voice. Indeed, the creatures were retreating, moving with that same deliberate gait back toward the forest line. Within minutes, they had vanished into the shadows, leaving no trace of their presence save for the tracks in the soft mud of the riverbank. We waited another half hour, until full dawn, light spilled across the landscape before cautiously emerging from the river. Our bodies were stiff with cold, clothes sodden and heavy. William needed to be supported between Harold and Gregory, his condition concerning but not yet critical. The truck, miraculously, started on the first attempt. Its exterior was heavily damaged. Dented panels, a shattered headlight, deep gouges in the metal where those talon-like appendages had gripped the vehicle. The windshield was a spiderweb of cracks, barely holding together. We climbed inside, turning the heater to maximum despite the African morning heat. No one spoke as Gregory navigated carefully back to the main road, all of us scanning the tree lines and grassy expanses for any sign of the creature's return. It was mid-morning when we finally reached the ranger station, exhausted, traumatized, but alive. The staff there were initially skeptical of our account. Understandably so, given its fantastical nature. But the condition of our vehicle, with its distinctive damage pattern, lent credibility to our story. "We'll send a patrol to investigate," the senior ranger assured us, though the doubt in his eyes was evident. And we'll check on the other campsite you mentioned. Those people are dead, I said with quiet certainty. Whatever those creatures are, they hunted them down after we escaped. The ranger's expression hardened. We have no reports of any unusual predator activity in this section of the park, and there have been no missing persons reported. Check the records, Winston suggested. There must have been other incidents, other reports similar to ours. The ranger hesitated, then sighed. Look, I've worked in mana pools for 12 years. Every now and then we get stories, usually from local villages, occasionally from tourists, about tall creatures hunting at night. Most of us dismiss them as folklore or panic-induced misidentification. You know about these things? I demanded, anger suddenly rising through my exhaustion. And you still allow people to camp in that area? He raised his hands defensively. No one has ever provided evidence. No photographs, no bodies of victims or of these supposed creatures. Just stories and rumors. He glanced at our battered truck. Until now, perhaps. A patrol was indeed dispatched to investigate both our campsite and the one downstream where we'd met Joseph. They returned late that afternoon with disturbing news. Our camp had been methodically destroyed, not by animals scavenging for food, but by deliberate, systematic dismantling. Tents had been taken apart rather than torn. Equipment had been disassembled rather than simply damaged. As for Joseph's camp, there was nothing left. No tents, no equipment, no sign of their vehicle. Most concerning of all, no bodies and no blood evidence to suggest violence had occurred there. It's as if they were never there, the patrol leader reported. But I knew better. We all did. That scream in the night had been real, a human voice cut short in final agony. Whatever fate had befallen Joseph and his brother, it had been deliberately concealed by creatures with intelligence enough to understand the concept of evidence. The authorities were predictably skeptical. Park officials documented our account, but attributed the damage to our vehicle to a confrontation with Cape Buffalo, a common and dangerous presence in mana pools. The strange tracks we described were dismissed as distorted. Impressions of known animals, perhaps hyena or baboon. Our American guests were eager to accept these rational explanations, their minds already beginning the work of reframing memory into something more palatable. Gregory, Winston, and I knew better. We had seen those creatures clearly in the moonlight and headlights, their impossible proportions, their coordinated hunting strategy, their almost human intelligence. Most disturbing of all, we had witnessed their curiosity about us, not merely as prey, but as subjects of some incomprehensible study. When we returned to Johannesburg, we conducted our own research. Historical accounts from early explorers in the Zambezi Valley mentioned encounters with tall walkers or night stalkers, beings that resembled humans but moved with animal grace and hunted in coordinated packs. Local Shona and Tonga folklore included stories of the Long Ones who stole humans from villages during moonless nights. More recently, we discovered online forums where tourists and professional guides shared similar experiences, always in remote sections of the Zambezi Valley, always involving tall humanoid creatures that defied conventional zoological categorization. Most accounts ended with narrow escapes similar to our own, but some concluded with disappearances never adequately explained. The most chilling pattern emerged when we plotted these incidents on a map. They formed a rough circle centered on a particularly remote section of Mana Pools National Park, an area rarely visited by tourists due to its difficult access and distance from developed facilities. At the center of this circle lay a valley that didn't appear on most tourist maps, but was marked on older survey charts as Nzvimbo Yekufa, the place of death in the Shona language. This evidence, circumstantial though it was, suggested a territory, a range for creatures that should not exist, according to modern science. Perhaps they represented some undiscovered primate species, adapted for nocturnal hunting and territorial defense. Perhaps they were something else entirely, something that defied conventional biological classification. Whatever they were, They remained in my thoughts long after physical distance should have provided psychological comfort. I found myself startling awake in the middle of the night, convinced I could hear that strange vocalization, that series of clicks and whistles that had seemed almost like communication. One question haunted me more than others. Why had they let us go? Those creatures had clearly possessed the ability to overtake our truck, to prevent our escape to the river. Their restraint suggested decision rather than limitation, as if our encounter had been some kind of test or assessment rather than a simple predator-prey interaction. Recalled the way the leader had studied us in the river, head tilted in what had looked disturbingly like scientific curiosity. I remembered how it had examined our abandoned camp with methodical thoroughness, inspecting our equipment and possessions, as if cataloguing the artifacts of another species. These were not the behaviors of animals, not even highly intelligent ones like great apes or elephants. They suggested purpose, abstract thought, and the capacity to defer immediate predatory gratification for some longer-term objective. 6 months after our encounter, I received an email from a researcher at the University of Zimbabwe who specialized in cryptozoology, the study of animals whose existence remains unconfirmed by science. She had heard of our experience through mutual contacts and wanted to interview us for a paper she was preparing on unusual predator sightings in the Zambezi Valley. I agreed to meet her, partly out of curiosity about her research, and partly from a lingering need to make sense of what we had witnessed. Gregory declined to participate, having retreated into stubborn silence about the entire incident. Winston agreed reluctantly, though he expressed skepticism about academic interest in what most considered a fantastical story. Dr. Nyathi met us at a cafe in Johannesburg, a soft-spoken woman with intelligent eyes and a methodical approach that immediately put me at ease. She recorded our account without interruption, occasionally making notes, but offering neither belief nor disbelief as we described our encounter in detail. When we finished, she turned off her recorder and leaned forward. "Your description matches others I have collected, 17 separate accounts over the past decade, all from the same general region of mana pools." "Then you believe us?" Winston asked, surprise evident in his voice. "I believe you experience something," she replied carefully. "Whether it exists objectively or represents some shared perceptual phenomenon remains an open question. But the consistency across independent accounts is remarkable." She showed us photographs other witnesses had drawn, crude sketches that nonetheless captured the essential features of the creatures we had encountered. The disproportionate height, the elongated limbs, the expressionless faces with wide-set eyes. "What are they?" I asked, unsettled by how accurately these strangers had depicted what we had seen. Dr. Nyathi hesitated. "The scientific community doesn't acknowledge their existence, but local traditions speak of them as guardians of sacred wilderness, neither animal nor human, but something between the two, tasked with protecting areas of spiritual significance from human intrusion." "They didn't seem very spiritual when they were trying to kill us," Winston observed dryly. "Perhaps not," she conceded. "But consider this. Despite their apparent advantages, superior speed, strength, and numbers, all of your group survived. Most witnesses report similar outcomes. They are encountered, they inspire terror, they pursue, but they rarely kill, at least not when multiple witnesses are present to report the encounter. Joseph and his brother didn't survive," I pointed out. "We don't know that with certainty," she countered. "No bodies were recovered." Something in her tone made me examine her more closely. "You've seen them yourself, haven't you?" Her expression remained neutral, but her eyes confirmed my suspicion. 5 years ago, near the eastern boundary of Mana Pools, I was conducting a survey of nocturnal insect species when they surrounded my camp. They destroyed my equipment, particularly my cameras and recording devices. They watched me for hours, but never attacked. Why would they target your equipment specifically? Winston asked. I believe they understand, on some level, the concept of documentation, of evidence that would establish their existence beyond anecdote and folklore. She closed her notebook with finality. Whatever they are, they clearly wish to remain undocumented by modern science. As we parted ways, Dr. Nyathi left us with a final thought that continues to disturb me. Consider the implications if they are intelligent enough to understand the threat that formal scientific discovery would pose to their continued existence. Consider what that suggests about their capacity for abstract thought, for strategic planning, for anticipating human behavior. I have not returned to Manipul since our encounter. Gregory has, stubbornly insisting that one inexplicable experience should not deprive him of his favorite wilderness area. He reports nothing unusual in his subsequent visits, though he now avoids the remote section where we encountered the creatures. Winston relocated to Australia shortly after our meeting with Dr. Nyathi, citing job opportunities, but privately admitting he could no longer feel comfortable in the African bush, knowing what might be watching from the darkness. As for me, I continue to research similar accounts, gathering information and comparing notes with others who have encountered these beings. I maintain correspondence with Dr. Nyathi, who has expanded her investigation to include similar reports from remote areas in Zambia and Mozambique. I no longer dismiss traditional knowledge or folklore as mere superstition. The African bush holds secrets that modern science has yet to classify, creatures that exist in the liminal spaces between established categories, defying our attempts to catalogue and control the natural world. Sometimes late at night, I still wake thinking I hear that strange vocalization, that almost language composed of clicks and whistles. And I wonder if the creatures are communicating with each other about us, just as we communicate about them. I wonder what they call us in their incomprehensible tongue, what place we occupy in their understanding of the world, and I wonder if someday our paths will cross again in the wild places where the old spirits of Africa still roam free. 18 months after our encounter, an unexpected development reignited my obsession with the creatures of Manipuls. A package arrived at my home, bearing no return address and postmarked from Harare, Zimbabwe. Inside was a weathered leather journal and a handwritten note that simply read, "You deserve to know. Be careful with this knowledge." The journal belonged to a British colonial administrator named Edmund Harcourt, who had been stationed in what was then Rhodesia during the late 1920s. His entries documented an expedition into the remote sections of the Zambezi Valley, ostensibly to survey potential sites for agricultural development, but secretly investigating reports of anomalous bipedal predators described by local populations. Harcourt's elegant handwriting detailed encounters, strikingly similar to our own, tall, gaunt figures that moved with impossible speed, coordinated their actions with evident intelligence, and exhibited curiosity about human equipment and behavior. But his expedition ventured further than any modern account I had collected, penetrating deep into the region local people called Nzvimbo Yekufa. What they discovered there defied simple explanation. Harcourt described structures, not crude animal dens, but deliberately arranged stone formations that created shelters, storage areas, and what appeared to be ceremonial spaces. His team documented symbols carved into rock faces, geometric patterns that suggested abstract thinking, and possibly a form of written communication. Most disturbing were Harcourt's descriptions of the artifacts they recovered from one abandoned site, tools, fashioned from bone and stone that demonstrated sophisticated craftsmanship, containers made from modified gourds and treated animal bladders, and what appeared to be ceremonial objects decorated with patterns matching those carved into the nearby rocks. These were not the creations of animals, not even highly intelligent primates. They represented material culture, the deliberate modification of natural materials to serve specific purposes beyond immediate survival needs. Whatever these creatures were, they possessed capabilities that blurred the fundamental distinction between human and animal. Harcourt's final entries grew increasingly disturbed as his expedition documented these findings. He questioned whether they should be reporting their discoveries to scientific authorities or whether such knowledge might be dangerous in the wrong hands. His last complete entry, dated April 17, 1929, contained a chilling observation. These beings are not mere animals to be classified and controlled. They represent something else entirely, a parallel evolutionary path perhaps, or the remnants of some hitherto unknown branch of hominid development. They observe us as we observe them, study us as we study them. I'm increasingly convinced that we have not discovered them. Rather, they have permitted us to glimpse their existence for reasons we cannot yet comprehend. The journal ended abruptly after this entry. A newspaper clipping tucked into the final pages reported that Edmund Harcourt and 3 members of his expedition had perished in a tragical accident when their camp was apparently attacked by lions. 2 surviving members of the team provided this account to authorities, but refused to return to the site to recover bodies or equipment. I spent weeks verifying the journal's authenticity, consulting with historians specializing in colonial Rhodesia and experts in document analysis. All evidence suggested it was genuine, a first-hand account of contact with creatures that modern science refused to acknowledge. The implications were profound. If Harcourt's observations were accurate, these beings possessed not just intelligence, but culture, symbolic thinking, tool use, construction capabilities, and possibly language. They existed not as animals governed by instinct, but as a society with its own internal logic and structure. Most significantly, they had maintained their secrecy for at least a century, actively avoiding documentation and scientific discovery. This suggested not just intelligence, but metacognition, an understanding of human behavior and intentions, and the capacity to strategically prevent their own classification and study. I shared my findings with Dr. Nyathi, who received them with academic caution but personal belief. This aligns with traditional knowledge that has been dismissed for generations, she observed during one of our long discussions. Many Shona elders speak of the Long people as having their own villages deep in the forbidden valleys, places where humans are not welcome. Then what are they? I pressed, still searching for some classification that would fit these beings into my understanding of the natural world. Perhaps that's the wrong question, she suggested. Western scientific taxonomy assumes our right to classify, to place every living thing within our human hierarchical system. Some beings may exist outside these categories altogether, neither human nor animal as we understand these terms, but something else entirely. This perspective challenged my fundamental assumptions about reality. If creatures with intelligence, culture, and society could exist undocumented in the modern world, what did that imply about our supposed mastery of the natural environment? What other beings might walk the remote corners of our planet, carefully avoiding human documentation? My research led me to similar accounts from other wilderness regions, the Pacific Northwest of America, the remote forests of Russia, the unexplored valleys of the Himalayas. All featured encounters with bipedal beings that exhibited intelligence and deliberate concealment behavior. All were dismissed by mainstream science as folklore, misidentification, or hoaxes. Yet the patterns were too consistent to dismiss entirely. The specificity of behavioral descriptions from witnesses who had no contact with each other. The similar physical characteristics reported across cultural and geographical boundaries. The consistent themes of territorial defense and technological avoidance, these suggested something beyond mere legend. 6 months after receiving Harcourt's journal, I made a decision that friends and family considered foolhardy at best, suicidal at worst. I would return to mana pools, this time with the specific intention of finding evidence of these beings, not to expose their existence to the world, but to understand them on their own terms. Dr. Nayati agreed to accompany me, her academic caution overcome by scientific curiosity. We assembled a small team, just 4 of us, including a local guide named Tendai, who had his own encounter story, and a wildlife photographer who specialized in nocturnal animals. We entered mana pools during the dry season, when water sources were limited and animal activity concentrated around the remaining pools and the Zambezi River. Our permits allowed us into remote sections that most tourists never visited, and we established our base camp in an area where multiple sightings had been reported over the years. Unlike typical research expeditions, we brought minimal technology. No trail cameras, no recording devices, no equipment that might trigger the technological aversion these beings had demonstrated in previous encounters. Instead, we relied on direct observation, handwritten notes, and memory. For the first week, we detected nothing unusual. Wildlife abounded, elephants visited our camp regularly, hippos grunted in the nearby river pools, lions called in the night. But we saw no strange tracks, heard no unusual vocalizations, felt no sense of being watched by anything other than the normal predators of the African bush. On the 8th night, everything changed. We were gathered around our small fire, discussing the next day's exploration plans, when Tendai suddenly raised his hand for silence. We froze, straining to hear what had caught his attention. At first, I perceived only the normal night sounds of the bush. Then gradually, I became aware of the absence. Insects had stopped chirping, nightjars had ceased their calls, the distant grunt of hippos had fallen silent. The bush held its breath, as it does only in the presence of something that disrupts the natural order. "They're here," Tendai whispered, not needing to specify who they were. We remained motionless, fighting the instinctive urge to shine our flashlights into the surrounding darkness or reach for weapons. We had agreed beforehand that if contact occurred, we would demonstrate non-aggressive behavior, no sudden movements, no defensive posturing, no actions that could be interpreted as threatening. The first indication of their presence was subtle, a faint, musky odor carried on the night breeze, similar to what I had detected briefly during our previous encounter. Then came a soft sound from beyond the firelight. Not quite a vocalization, but a deliberate noise, as if something wanted us to know it was there. Dr. Nayati responded with a traditional Shona greeting, spoken softly but clearly into the darkness. For several heartbeats, silence reigned. Then, astonishingly, a sound returned from the darkness, not a direct mimicry of her words, but a series of clicks and whistles that somehow conveyed acknowledgement. My skin prickled with the realization that communication, however rudimentary, was occurring. These were not animals responding to stimuli, but beings engaging in deliberate exchange of sounds with specific intent. Over the next 3 hours, this tentative communication continued. We remained by our fire, occasionally speaking simple greetings or statements into the darkness. They remained invisible beyond the firelight, occasionally responding with their own vocalizations, gradually moving closer, but never entering the illuminated area. Near midnight, Dr. Nayati slowly reached into her pack and withdrew a simple gift we had prepared. A hand-carved wooden bowl filled with fresh fruit. She placed it on the ground at the edge of our firelight, then retreated to her original position. For a long time, nothing happened. The bowl remained untouched. Then so quickly that I barely registered the movement, a long, gaunt arm reached into the light, grasped the bowl, and withdrew it into darkness. No one spoke. The significance of this interaction transcended words. We had offered. They had accepted. A basic social protocol had been acknowledged by beings whose existence science refused to recognize. Shortly before dawn, they departed, not all at once, but gradually. their presence diminishing until the normal sounds of the bush resumed and we knew we were alone again. We spent the remaining hours before sunrise in quiet discussion, documenting every detail we could recall while the experience remained fresh. Over the next 2 weeks, a pattern developed. Each night, they would approach our camp, maintaining distance but gradually remaining for longer periods. Each night, we would leave simple offerings, fruit, handcrafted objects, small portions of our food. Each night, these offerings would be taken. On the 12th night, they left something in return, a carefully arranged collection of small objects placed just at the perimeter of our firelight. River stones positioned in a geometric pattern, seed pods arranged by size and color. A piece of carved wood that resembled no animal I could identify but possessed undeniable artistic intent. A gift exchange, Dr. Nyati whispered, her academic detachment momentarily abandoned in wonder. A fundamental characteristic of all human cultures. By the 3rd week, visual contact had been established. Brief, peripheral glimpses at first, then more sustained observation from the shadows. We maintained our non-threatening posture, moving slowly and deliberately when they were present, avoiding direct stares or sudden gestures. On what would be our final night in Mana Pools, the encounter I had both hoped for and feared finally occurred. As we sat quietly around our fire, one of the creatures emerged fully into the light. It stood over 3 meters tall, its proportions alien yet recognizably hominid. Its body was covered in short, dense fur, its limbs elongated and powerfully muscled. Its face, the feature that had seemed so expressionless in the terror of our first encounter, now revealed subtle mobility. The wide-set eyes reflecting both firelight and intelligence as it regarded us with evident assessment. No one moved or spoke. Even breathing seemed intrusive in that moment of unprecedented contact. The creature maintained its position for perhaps 30 seconds, its gaze moving deliberately from one human face to another, as if memorizing our features or reading our intentions. Then, with deliberate slowness, it extended one long arm toward us, palm open, not in threat, but in a gesture unmistakably similar to a human greeting. Its fingers were long and dexterous, tipped with the claw-like appendages I had previously seen only as weapons, but which now appeared more like specialized tools. Dr. Nyati, with remarkable courage, slowly extended her own hand in response, not touching, but mirroring the gesture from a distance of several meters. A simple acknowledgement between two intelligent species. The creature held the position for several heartbeats, then withdrew its arm. It made a series of soft vocalizations, clicks, whistles, and low rumbles, organized in what seemed like intentional patterns. Then, with no further demonstration, it turned and vanished into the darkness with that same impossible speed I remembered from our first encounter. We departed Mana Pools the next morning as planned, our small team forever changed by what we had experienced. The photographer, despite having witnessed everything, had honored our agreement not to document the creatures with his equipment. Tendai seemed unsurprised by the encounter, as if it merely confirmed what his culture had always known. Dr. Nyati was already formulating research questions that might never find answers. As for me, I left with a profound reconsideration of human exceptionalism. We are not alone in our capacity for intelligence, culture, or abstract thought. Other minds inhabit this planet alongside us, minds that perceive reality through different sensory frameworks, process information through different neural structures, and exist within social systems beyond our current understanding. 3 years have passed since that final encounter in Mana Pools. I have not returned, though the temptation remains constant. Dr. Nyati continues her research, collecting accounts and building a careful case for academic consideration of what she now calls non-human sentient species, rather than cryptids or legendary creatures. Our findings remain largely private, shared only with a small network of researchers who approach the subject with appropriate scientific humility and ethical consideration. We have published no papers, released no photographs, submitted no evidence to mainstream scientific journals. This restraint is deliberate. The beings we encountered have clearly maintained their separation from human society through active concealment. They have systematically removed evidence of their existence, avoided technological documentation, and limited physical contact to isolated encounters that remain easy to dismiss as misidentification or imagination. Their purpose in this concealment remains unknown. Perhaps it represents simple territorial defense, protecting their range from human encroachment. Perhaps it reflects historical experience with human violence toward the unknown. Or perhaps it serves some deeper purpose we cannot yet comprehend. What seems increasingly clear is that they possess not just intelligence but wisdom, a long-term perspective that recognizes the danger that human discovery would pose to their continued independent existence. In a world where humans categorize, study, manage, and inevitably control every species we fully document, their strategic avoidance of scientific classification may represent a sophisticated survival strategy. I sometimes wonder what they call themselves in their own communication system. What concepts structure their understanding of the world? Do they have history, art, spirituality? Do they study us as we attempt to study them? These questions may never find answers accessible to human comprehension. The most profound impact of my encounters has been philosophical rather than scientific. I've been forced to confront the limitations of human knowledge, not just the practical boundaries of what we currently know, but the conceptual boundaries of what our perceptual and cognitive systems allow us to know. We perceive reality through specialized sensory organs that detect only narrow bands of available information, visible light rather than the full electromagnetic spectrum. A limited range of sound frequencies, chemical signatures that register as taste or smell. Our brains process this filtered information through neural architectures shaped by our evolutionary history as diurnal, social primates. The resulting model of reality is functional, but inherently limited. Other minds, operating through different sensory systems and cognitive architectures, may perceive aspects of reality entirely inaccessible to human awareness. The beings of mana pools, whatever they are, whatever they call themselves, represent not just an undocumented species, but a profound challenge to human epistemological certainty. They exist simultaneously within our world and beyond our understanding. Residents of the same physical planet, but inhabitants of a conceptual universe we can glimpse only partially and indirectly. Last month, I received another anonymous package, similar to the one that had contained Harcourt's journal, but smaller. Inside was a single object, a small stone carved into an abstract form that resembled both a human and one of the tall beings. The figures interconnected in a way that suggested relationship rather than conflict. No note accompanied this object, but none was needed. I understood its significance immediately. Someone, perhaps one of our research team, perhaps another witness, perhaps even one of the beings themselves, through human intermediary, was acknowledging the connection established during our brief contact. I keep this carving on my desk as I write these words, a tangible reminder that the boundaries of knowledge remain fluid, that reality exceeds our models of it, and that humility before the unknown may be the most appropriate scientific position. I do not know if I will ever encounter these beings again. Part of me hopes for further contact, for deeper understanding, for the privilege of communication across the species boundary. Another part recognizes that some boundaries exist for reasons beyond human comprehension, and that respect for those boundaries may be more important than satisfying our instinctive drive to know, to classify, to incorporate into our existing frameworks. What I can say with certainty is this: the African bush holds mysteries that defy simple categorization. Beings of intelligence and purpose move through the shadows of mana pools, navigating a complex relationship with human observers, sometimes threatening, sometimes communicative, always deliberate in their interactions. I have seen them with my own eyes, heard their vocalizations, witnessed evidence of their culture and technology. I have experienced both their territorial defense and their capacity for non-violent contact. I know they exist, regardless of scientific consensus or official acknowledgement. And I understand now why they watch from the darkness, why they destroy cameras and recording equipment, why they leave no bodies or specimens for laboratory analysis. They are defending something precious and irreplaceable, their autonomy, their way of being, their right to exist beyond human classification and control. In a world where human activity has disrupted nearly every ecosystem, where our technologies monitor the most remote regions, where our taxonomies presume to categorize all living things according to our own hierarchical systems, these beings have maintained their independence through strategy, intelligence, and careful management of human perception. Perhaps that is their greatest wisdom, recognizing that in the modern world, undocumented existence may be the only truly free existence. By inhabiting the boundary between known and unknown, between scientific fact and dismissed folklore, they preserve a space beyond human domination. I watch the darkness now with different eyes, attuned to the possibility of intelligences that operate beyond our frameworks of understanding. I listen to traditional knowledge with renewed respect, recognizing that what Western science dismisses as superstition often contains truths preserved through generations of direct experience. The watchers of mana pools have changed how I perceive reality itself, not as a fixed, objective domain waiting to be fully mapped by human science, but as a vast, multi-layered territory inhabited by minds and awareness that may never fully translate into human terms. And when I walk in wild places now, I move with greater humility, conscious that I may be observed by eyes that perceive beyond my understanding, evaluated by minds that process reality through entirely different frameworks, remembered by beings whose perception of time and space may transcend the limitations of human consciousness. In the deepest wilderness, at the edge of firelight, along the boundary between known and unknown, they watch and wait. And sometimes, if we approach with openness rather than presumption, with respect rather than entitlement, they allow us glimpses of a reality larger and more complex than our human-centered models can accommodate. That knowledge, that visceral understanding of the limitations of human perception and cognition, is perhaps the most valuable thing I brought back from mana pools. More precious than evidence, more significant than academic recognition, it remains with me as both intellectual humility and spiritual awareness. The watchers remain, moving through their own understanding of existence, and I remain forever changed by having glimpsed, however briefly and incompletely, the world through their eyes.